Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. This is a special, very special simulcast that I decided to do at the last minute. So I don't expect for a lot of people to join in right now unless you get the notification. But hello everybody. For those who are joining and who will watch this, I'm going to give my commentary and thoughts on the live debate between Chad O. Jackson and DELANO SQUIRES with Jason Whitlock hosting it regarding the legacy of MLK. Come on and tap on in. Wipe your feet at the door. Share this live stream as well. I'm going to be sharing the screen as well too, just in a moment. Just want to get some things set up so everyone can be, so everybody will be able to chime in and join in on the discussion as well too. So let me reduce that sound as well too. But hello everybody. Hello Facebook fam. Just give me a moment. They're just getting started, so just stand by. I'll be sharing the screen and we'll give our thoughts and commentary. Hopefully it won't be an issue as far as doing that with the stream. So let me go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and share the screen here and let me know if you guys are able to hear it. Here we go.
Things should have stayed in place until such time when the populace within a particular state said, we are ready to no longer discriminate against our black citizens in the ways that we have been doing. Is that your position?
I'll articulate my position in a more elaborate way when I get a chance.
Okay.
I don't know if I can answer that in a simple yes or no, but with a gun to my head, I would say yes, because that's in keeping with what Booker T. Washington laid out, and that was actually yielding the fruit that it was desired to yield.
So we can come back to that in the back and forth aspect of this.
Okay.
Delano, if you got 20, 30 more seconds, if you had anything else you wanted to rebut, or we can...
No, we can go to chat.
It looks like he just wants to move right into the...
No, you got your time.
which is fine.
Reclaim your time.
Restart the clock, 2 minutes, and you can rebut what you heard from Delano.
So one of the things that Delano brought up in his opening statements, which was he brought up what life was like. And with all due respect, this is one of the things that the left often does, which is they really kind of lean into the art of storytelling and imagine yourself as a black man in the 1930s or what have you.
I don't know.
So as to really kind of push this notion or this narrative that the conditions were such that there needed to be drastic, radical change.
No, I wouldn't call Delano a leftist, so I'm not really sure if that's what Chad meant, but I think that he may want to respond and ask him to clarify that.
Pushing in those days, this idea of revolution, a lot of it was the exacerbation, the exaggeration, the exploitation of grievances. This is part of the kind of Marxist framework. We try to find a grievance, we exploit it to the hills, and we try to get people riled up enough to where they then will take to the streets. It will cause unrest. It will cause this kind of destabilization phase. And out of that destabilization, people will cry out for the federal government to come in and do something about it. When you read Risa Galliabuff's book, she's a professor out of Virginia Law School. She wrote a book called The Lost Promise of Civil Rights. And she's not ideologically on my side. She's a leftist. But she even makes the point that the civil rights division of the Justice Department was built for the purpose of government expansion, which goes back to the question that you had about, is it my view that the closer you get to the people, the more moral the government is? In a sense, yes. Because the fact of the matter is we are a country made up of diverse people with diverse backgrounds and diverse beliefs. And this is why I would side more with the anti-federalists, Patrick Henry, Robert Yates, Luther Martin, and others, that believe that to the extent that you try to have this big, overarching, strong federal power that's centralized, you're going to have the kind of resentment, the kind of unrest, and all the things that breed from that because we are so diverse. So you need to have it kind of condensed down as much as you possibly can to make it closer to the people.
At this point, it's on you all. You go back and forth. You got questions you want to ask or whatever, do it now. We can go 10, 15 minutes, knock yourself out.
So where Chad started there was, I almost fell out of my, Chad said that I was engaging in the art of storytelling. I would wager Chad has at least 100 hours of storytelling as it relates to MLK and the civil rights movement. And one of the things and I've said this publicly, so I can say it here, is that when I consume Chad's work, I notice the use oftentimes of adjectives where I think verbs should be. One of the favorites is nefarious.
Wow.
Right? Wow. So instead of saying this person said this or this person did that, what Chad would say is, oh, this particular act, the law was passed under nefarious circumstances. That's the art of storytelling. Chad, in his opener, talked about how black people lived in the South, and I've heard him talk about there was more harmony between blacks and whites in the South than people want to give credit to.
Yeah, you're right, Pocahontas. Words do matter.
Some places and some locales. But the notion that storytelling is sort of the exclusive province of the left is something that that's, come on now.
I was wondering who's going to go there with that.
So that was one small point.
Yeah.
But again, I would ask Chad, do you think that a black man who wanted to shop in a particular retailer and was told you cannot shop here because you are a black man had a legitimate grievance, let's say in the year 1955?
I would say
No.
yes. I would say yes.
Okay.
I would say
Because we
yes.
have freedom of association.
Biblically.
And if
See,
a white store,
and that's why I disagree with Chad on.
I believe it's their right to not allow you to shop in their store. And on the contrary, I believe if you're a black man who owns a store and don't want white people coming in, that's perfectly your right.
Do y'all hear this? But these men are Christians.
Association. And so I believe that matters
You can't
such
you
as
can't
that
discriminate.
should be handled in the marketplace. I don't believe that we should cede to the government
Wow.
the right to force people to serve those whom they don't want to serve or hire
Wow.
whom they don't want to hire
Wow.
for or not be able to fire people for certain reasons that they find to be fitting. And so yes, this idea that it is
Yeah,
a
Pocahontas,
legitimate
both of them are
grievance
Christians.
that a black man who was denied the transaction of buying a sandwich should now go to the government and have the government
Because of
calm
the color
down
of
and
their
put a
skin.
gun to the person's head to serve me. I don't believe in that level of coercion by any stretch of the imagination. I do, however, believe in desegregation. In other words, I don't believe that there should be laws on the books where the state is forcing segregation. And so to that extent, I do believe that those laws should be done away with. And those laws were being done away with. I mean, whether you're talking about, from the turn of the 20th century into the middle part of the 20th century, you did see some of these laws being repealed and giving credit where credit is due. The NAACP were taking some of these cases to court and they were having victories in the courts. But then a lot of it too was through people coming together on the ground level, having nothing to do with the government at all. These were what we call interracial commissions, where responsible Negro and white leaders were working out their differences, working out their issues, without it ever getting to the courts or getting to the legislature or what have you. And so this is what we call the reformative process. With the reformative process, you have a character building component in it because it takes hard work.
Now, with all this that Chad is saying, this is a violation of the second greatest commandment, right? Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself," right? So with him making all this stuff and making all this statements rather to defend discrimination, because it's legal to discriminate, but it's a sin to discriminate based on if we all made in the Imago Dei and we all come from one blood. Having racism or prejudice because of color or even because of gender, that flies in the face of the gospel that Chad is supposed to represent. And he's saying it's okay for businesses to discriminate. And we should not invoke the government to hold people responsible for their prejudices and their overt racism.
You look at the Nick Fuentes type, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but when you look at the Nick Fuentes types and you look at this kind of contingent that are now rising up as the pendulum swings from the civil.
What's going on, Big Lou? What's going on, Kino?
It doesn't. Anyway, I've been rambling. Go ahead.
So I want to ask two questions to sort of bracket what I understand to be your governing philosophies in two periods of time. You talked, excuse me, you used the word revolution. You talked about how, sort of revolutionary change is not sustainable. Would you apply that to the American founding as well?
Well, that's actually a tough question because the difference is you did have a foreign entity that was governing us from afar.
Okay.
And here you've already had a long established culture that has existed for a long period of time, and I would say that it's different than the kind of subversive kind of agitation that we saw with communist revolution.
I mean, there was certainly agitation. There was certainly violence in the streets. There were a list of grievances. Correct.
Yeah, there were grievances,
Yeah.
but again, the way that communism disseminates through deceptive, subversive means is altogether different than what Thomas Jefferson, for example.
Yeah, Jew and Greek. This is a live debate on Jason Whitlock's channel. DELANO SQUIRES. Both of these men are Christians. They're believers. DELANO SQUIRES is pro MLK as far as his legacy, and Chad Jackson is anti MLK legacy.
But I tend to see I tend to see what we were doing during the so-called Revolutionary War and the spread of communism as two completely different things.
But I think part of that is because you are reaching a conclusion, and that's fair for you because you'll say, look, I've done the historical research and I reached this conclusion. But I think you're reaching a conclusion where an argument should be, because your entire characterization of the civil rights era is basically this was communist and therefore it was negative, right? So it's either, and I mean, we're human beings, so sometimes you can have tension within your principles. But when I hear you say, revolutions are not sustainable forms of social change, agitation, violence in the street, and then you say, well, the American founding, sure, we had our own culture. The government who was ruling us was far away. I mean, black folk will say, look, we had our own culture for hundreds of years. The people who are ruling over us may be near, but we have similar grievances, right? We don't have representation. I was watching a video with you last night, actually, and it sounded like you were making an argument against enfranchising free black males post-Civil War. And you correct me if that argument was wrong, if I'm mischaracterizing it. So it seems as if there's some tension in your principles, and I'm just trying to understand that. The War for Independence, the American founding was one point. The second point, and again, this is more contemporary, would you then, just given what you said about the ability of private enterprises to serve whom they want, to hire whom they want, would you then be in favor of, let's say, what conservatives characterize as DEI policies, where companies say we're going to favor Black, Hispanic, LGBT, women, whatever, non-white males in hiring and promotion over white males? Would you be in favor of that? And do you think federal or state law that prohibits that, would you characterize those as federal overreaches or government overreaches?
I'm going to try to reframe your question to understand it better.
Okay.
So are you asking, is it okay for a private organization, entity, school, company to have DEI policies? Is that what you're asking?
No, I want to put a finer point on it. When I say DEI, because people mean different things when they string those three letters together, I'm talking specifically. If Coca-Cola in 1954 said we're not hiring Negroes, if we have Negroes, they bring the sodas into the restaurant and then they go on about their business. It sounds as if your position would be Coca-Cola has a right to do that.
Yep.
If Coca-Cola in 2026 says we're not hiring any more white dudes, to the extent that we have white dudes in this company, they will no longer get promotions. And when we have internal meetings, the people of color go in one room and the white people go in another room. I'm asking, would you be okay with that?
Constitutionally speaking, it's their right. Coca-Cola has a right to do what Coca-Cola wants to do. I might not like it. My neighbor might not like it, but I have nothing to do with Coca-Cola. I didn't put in the blood, sweat, and tears to build Coca-Cola.
Do y'all hear this?
Therefore, what my opinion is, whether as a voter or just as a man on the streets.
What about as a man of God, though, Chad?
They do. So, I mean, I don't know about the legalities over, the difference between publicly traded companies versus private, like legitimately private companies.
Right.
But even to the extent that there is,
and I was told this is not a live. This is
I do believe that in many ways, a lot of what is done in this country is a complete betrayal, if you will, of our genuine constitutional principles. And so speaking in terms of constitutional intent and the freedom of association, I don't believe, I do believe that Coca-Cola should have a right to run their business, how they wish to run their business, and the decision as to whether they will stay in business or how well they'll do as a business should be left to the free market.
So
Simply.
then, let's say the conservative activists, and I'm asking these questions because, again, I'm making parallels, and also I'm trying to true up the scales because I want to understand sort of the principles that undergird your argument. So conservative activists who say this is anti-white discrimination and this should be eliminated using the force of law. You would say would you characterize those people as agitators in the same way you would, sort of 1960s or civil rights protesters or...
Yeah, I mean, I do that all the time.
Okay.
And this is why, again, I don't really have a political home. I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat because I believe in the true intent and the true edicts of the Constitution. If up to me, we would even go back before the Constitution to the Confederation of States, quite frankly. But I don't believe in this kind of, I don't like this thing happening in society. Let us run to the government and have them do something about it. I don't like that because to the extent that you do that, it becomes this ever expanding thing. And again, you can't do that when you have a country so large as ours, so diverse as ours. I mean, Texas is not the same as Tennessee. It's not.
Does Chad realize that the Constitution and its intent of the fathers that drafted the Constitution, they were not thinking about black folk being included in this all men created equal? Does Chad realize that when he's making this statement about supporting and defending discrimination and prejudice based on color?
About it. We seek safety and security in big government, and that's the part that I don't like. And so whether it's Republicans doing it or whether it's Democrats doing it, I don't like it either way. But what I am saying, though, is that when you look at the civil rights movement, when you look at a lot of the social justice movements over the course of the 20th century, they were doing it better than anyone, insofar that their kind of brain trust, the puppeteers, if you will, who are pulling the strings, these are people who have, and I made this point on Jason's show, these are people who studied the soft sciences, who studied the social sciences, who studied human behavior and group behavior, and they're using it to their advantage. I mean, when you look at, for example, in the USSR and how they were developing these ideas and developing these means of population control and controlling of public opinion, so on and so forth, where you look at the fact that they wanted to imperialize their ideology throughout the world through the domino effect, and wanted to do so in a way that doesn't really require having to pick up a gun against a nation. They did it through implosion. They did it through infiltration and subversion. And they were having success all over the world. The problem in the United States is that you had, by and large, a kind of church-going people, especially in the South. Negroes were heavily church-going, as you all know. And so this created a kind of captive audience. In the 1930s, of course, you had the Communist Party resolve to infiltrate the church. And so whether you're talking about Earl Browder's outstretched hand, whether you're talking about the work of Bella Dodd, of course, she would do it through the teachers' unions, but she writes about how the communists were infiltrating Protestant and Catholic seminaries and churches in order to blur the lines between Christianity and communism. And we know as Christians that we are not to participate in darkness, but we're to expose darkness.
Well, how do you
and
expose,
so nobody did this better than Martin Luther King.
Well, how do you expose darkness if you don't challenge the institutions that are promoting darkness? Anyway, let me shut up.
The fact of the matter is, with the help of the press and with the kind of instructions of his handlers, King was able to, in a sense, he was able to, what's the word I want to use here? He was able to kind of collectivize the people through charisma and through his kind of charm and through his oratory and through his speeches, which sounded like one thing, but if you go back and listen to those speeches and you know what you're listening to, you're going to hear something completely different. And what this did is it kind of knocked us off our square, as it were, and it caused particularly the young black radicals who were deviating from the kind of trajectory laid forth for them by their parents and grandparents. What it did was it kind of caused a lot of people to adopt this mentality that the way to be successful is through agitative means, is through revolution. And as a result of this, you saw this kind of downward trajectory.
Go ahead. Last one, and we got to move on.
Yeah, please.
It's interesting because on one hand, you will point to government overreach as the problem, right? But then on the other hand, you'd say, well, no, it's sort of collective action. And my thing is, prior to 1964, if King and other leaders are saying, look, there's certain things where there's unequal treatment based on race, and we want to mobilize people to change these things, right? And you would say this is on account of their handlers. I will stipulate I'm not the historian that you are, Chad, right? I do think it's interesting though, because I feel at times you use Marxism the way the left uses racism, which is to say around every corner and underneath every sheet.
Oh no!
But that's that would be my characterization. But that's fine, right? We could disagree on that.
I want to jump in there. Hold on, I want to jump in here, and I want to do this rarely though. But Marxism is antithetical to Christianity. And
so is discrimination.
I do believe it's an evil.
So is discrimination and prejudice
of Satan. And I do believe Satan is in control of the world. And so I don't think it's a conspiracy
Am I just tripping, y'all? Please tell me in the chat.
Oh, Marxism and that ideology is around every corner because that's Satan. And so it's like when I'm listening to this debate. And
if Marxism is antithetical to Christianity, then what is discrimination, prejudice, and overt racism in businesses, whether private or not? What is that? I'm confused.
But I'm just telling you my real reaction, and I'm sorry for jumping in here, but it's like, this man is sitting over it. Nope, God is my sole provider, period, end of story. And we've been hoodwinked by MLK and all this other stuff. Like, nope, the government is an equal or superior provider for you in this life than God. And it's like, this discussion and what you're bringing out of chat, very fascinating to me. But I will say, like, when I hear people like Marxism, the devil, Satan, things trying to move you away from God being your sole provider, it is around every corner. That's not a conspiracy theory, in my view.
Well, I would obviously make the argument that, and let me not use the word racism because it's so loaded, but I would argue that partiality, I'll use a biblical term.
Thank you.
Based on ethnicity is also a sin.
Thank you.
Now, we can debate which one is a greater sin. What I would certainly argue is that in this country, Marxism is the enemy at the door and racism is the monster under the bed. We're not Cuba. We haven't had Fidel Castro for 40 plus years. So the idea that, oh no.
Hold on, I just want to follow you through here. When you said
you probably
racism
moderating,
is
dude.
under the bed, you mean partiality is what you love?
Correct. Ethnic partiality is inside the house already. It's not something that has to be fought off from the outside, right? So I wanted, but let me finish the point that I was going to make, which is,
You put me
I get your
moderating.
point about government overreach, but a charismatic leader galvanizing people who want to follow him, because you can only be a leader if you have people following you, to change hearts and minds. How is that also evil? Because that's how social movements work. Whether that's the fight against abortion, or whether that'll be a fight to reestablish traditional marriage. It's always somebody leading something with the intention of changing hearts and minds. So I don't understand if it's not tied directly to government overreach, why what King and his cohorts were doing you would see as necessarily negative and detrimental.
Well, I'll try to answer the question as briefly as I possibly can because Jason wants to move on. But what I recommend people do, and I think I mentioned this on Jason's show before, so pardon me if I'm being redundant here, but what I recommend people do is go and read a book by Walter Lippmann, written in 1922, called Public Opinion. And in it, he lays out exactly what King would later do. when it comes to galvanizing the public, because that's the thing. In a democracy or in a constitutional republic, the way that you have social change is through social movements, right? It's not like a monarchy or a dictatorship where a king or dictator are able to move unilaterally. You have to have the kind of the illusion of choice, right? And to the extent that people show up to the polls and they pull the lever for this politician or that politician or this proposition or that proposition, oftentimes they're going into that voting booth with information that has been packed into their heads, either organically or artificially. And so understanding the social engineers, those who really kind of dedicate their lives to the studying of the soft sciences and who commit their lives to academia, or even in going a more nefarious route.
Is it just me, or is it sound like Chad is just filibustering? And I'm not being biased, because I mean, I got questions for both of them, but it just seems like when Delano was asking a question, Chad filibusters. Maybe it's me.
He says that if a leader wishes to push a policy,
because he also admits that he's not a debater. To Chad's point, he says that.
Is for an orator to appeal to the masses, either through pinching a grievance, by appealing to their patriotic sensibilities or their religious sensibilities. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that an orator is able to do that well, the masses will move in towards him and demand a policy of campaign. And that policy of campaign doesn't always have to coincide with the rhetoric that they used in the inception. It can be completely detached from it. Such is the case when it comes to Martin Luther King. When you look at the I Have a Dream speech, for example, and he's talking about, I have a dream that one day, my 4 little children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It seems like what he's offering is a meritocratic view, a meritocratic vision that everybody can get behind. Who can deny that? But the reality of it is, if you go back and you actually listen to that speech, because Delano, you and I, we've heard this speech growing up in school every year. I've heard it twice a year. Once during, in the weekend going into the Martin Luther King Day, but then you'd hear it in February during Black History Month. Mm-hmm. And even though we've heard the speech, we've never actually heard the speech, right? He's saying that that if America thinks that the Negro will go back to business as usual after the summer of 1963, where we saw a number of riots, then you're in for a rude awakening. He says that the whirlwinds of revolt will continue to rock this nation until the Negro gets his due justice. So he's using this very threatening language, and he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth. And he says that the Negro will never be free until justice rolls down like waters. He's using all this language, and he's using this kind of open-ended fallacy. And he says, one day we'll be free at last, thank God Almighty, we'll be free at last, right? So he delivers a speech. It becomes an instant classic. And right before he dies, he gives what's called the mountaintop speech. And he's talking about the promised land. Again, this coincides with the I Have a Dream speech. Mm-hmm. And he says, one day we'll get there. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. The promised land that he's referring to is socialism, is Marxism.
You're saying that based on what?
I'm saying that based on his own papers, his own writings. I mean, he wrote to Coretta Scott while they were in college that he envisioned a day where there will be a nationalization of industry, and he's writing about all these different things that are quintessentially Marxist. Now, he says that he isn't a Marxist, but you have to understand that he was going to school at the time.
I'm gonna put a pause on it, because I'm gonna put, because you're talking next, and we're moving to a different topic that leads
Jason.
right into what you're talking about.
Okay.
And so the question is, was MLK Jr. a socialist, a Marxist, or just a critic of the ills of capitalism?
You could just let him finish.
He was an avowed, well, not avowed.
4 minutes.
Let me not say that. He was a sneaky Marxist. Let me just say it that way. People have to understand, if you are looking for Martin Luther King to say in writing or out of his own mouth, I am a communist.
Right.
You'll be hard pressed to find that.
Right.
And so it seems to me, Delano, with all due respect, that that's exactly what you're looking for.
Good point.
And I say that because I've seen some of the things that you have, some of the things that you wrote for The Blaze. I've seen some of your tweets, and it seems like that's what you're looking for. You're looking for King saying out of his mouth, I'm a Marxist or I'm a communist. But the reality of it is we were dealing with a Cold War. We were dealing with a war of ideas where the American people, by and large, were antithetical to communism. You can't just come out and say you're a communist and think that you're going to have any kind of success. And so what they did, King in particular, he went to a school called Crozer Theological Seminary, which was overrun by communist professors. And what's interesting is that by the time King...
Is that here in Tennessee?
Yes. Well, no, that was in Pennsylvania. Crozer Theological Seminary was in Pennsylvania. He would later go to a communist training school in Tennessee called Highlander Folk School.
Yeah.
But King, he went to the school. It was overrun by these professors who were teaching the social gospel, which is a counterfeit gospel. That is to say, it's not the gospel at all.
Okay.
That was popularized by Walter Rauschenbusch in the late 1900s. What's interesting about this is it was a strategic move to get into the churches and to teach congregants something that's not the gospel at all, but something that uses Christianese, uses language that sounds very Christian in nature, but what it's preaching and teaching is something completely different. It's teaching, in essence, that God didn't come to save sinners, but rather that God came to save society from capitalism and from exploitation and all the things. So that's essentially what it is. You'll notice that every time King preached a sermon, he wasn't actually calling people to repentance. He was talking about, he was talking about basically the tenets of the social gospel. So he would learn about not only the social gospel, but also the Hegelian dialectic. In a sense, King was taught to basically mask his communist sensibilities behind the social gospel. And he would say things like, this is the gospel that I will preach to the world, referring to the nationalization of industry, radical redistribution of wealth, a guaranteed annual income, which was all kind of part of this I want to say Hegelian, but I guess what I mean to say is this Fabian kind of incremental march through the institutions. That's what King envisioned, and that's what he set out to implement. And he would implement it with success. He partnered with Bayard Rustin, who was an active member of the Communist Party. He worked with the Young Communist League. It seems like I'm going fast because I'm trying to cram all this into whatever time I have left.
We'll have plenty after.
But he worked with also Stanley Levison, who was a financier for the Communist Party. These were his handlers. These are the ones, Stanley Levison in particular, would give King directives like, hey, go to Ghana to celebrate the independence of Kwame Nkrumah, who's a new leader of the dictator of Ghana. He would send him to various churches throughout the country, really pushing and teaching this message, trying to galvanize people, trying to collectivize people for the movement, which most folks were completely unaware that it was in fact a communist plot.
Chad will pause here. Delano, I will remind you on this part, just want you to answer the question, not directly rebut Chad or use Chad as the rebuttal. Was MLK Jr. a socialist, a Marxist, or just a critic of the ills of capitalism?
At the very least, he was the last one, which is a critic of the ills of capitalism. And again, just for context, in King's day in the South, the median occupation for a black woman was a domestic. In 1959, the black poverty rate, this is according to the US Census Bureau, was about 40%, right? So yes, was there a growing and burgeoning black middle class? Absolutely. There've been, black dentists and doctors and debutantes and people on Martha's Vineyard for a long time. That wasn't sort of the overall condition of black America, and certainly not in parts of the South. But for me, it's important. If you're going to ask me about someone's ideology, right? One, I think we should define terms. So really quick, when I think, and I won't go through sort of the long dictionary definition of Marxism, I'll just give a couple of markers or things that typically characterize, a Marxist. Class struggle, classless societies, abolition of family, rejection of religion, revolution of the elites, revolution of the working class, obviously the proletariat against the elites, the bourgeoisie. So socialists, again, these slight variants, same family, but socialists oftentimes concerned about inequality, large social safety net and spending, and services for public benefit. The idea that someone who's critical of capitalism in the 1960s, right, who's concerned about income inequality and who advocates for a universal basic income, the idea that those things in and of themselves make you a communist or Marxist is one that I think is hard for anyone to sustain. Milton Friedman, the noted libertarian economist, was in favor of UBI. Now, he also wanted to shrink much of the welfare state, but he was in favor of UBI. Tucker Carlson, I remember this distinctly. This was several years ago, one of his opening monologues at the top of the new year, when Tucker Carlson talked about some of the issues that face inner city majority black neighborhoods, also face sort of rural majority white neighborhoods, and he criticized the type of crony capitalism that people like Mitt Romney advocated for. So you can find people, and then, I mean, conservative media is rife with politicians, pundits, who will talk about how the elites sort of, jam up the working class, jam up the everyday man. So you'll hear, particularly nowadays, it's young couples can't afford to buy a home. The cost of healthcare, of childcare, of everything is going up. And this is part of the reason why you have this sort of populist sentiment on the right. But I think what ends up happening is Chad will say, no, these few things that I find that King did, right? His critiques of capitalism and so on and so forth. Though that's the evidence I use to charge and convict him of Marxism. And I just reject that. Not because of King, not because I'm a King defender, but because I have certain principles. And one of those is when you bring a charge against a man, you need evidence. Evidence is not speculation, it's not hearsay. Evidence is not, oh, this is what I believe. No. Do I expect King to say that he's a Marxist? No, I do not. But when he writes specifically of the incompatibility between Christianity and communism, and Chad's response is, well, of course he would say that he's a Marxist. Then at a certain point, this is a circular argument, right? What I find interesting is that Chad will believe King when he writes in his own words, and we'll get to this later, when he denies the sort of bodily resurrection of Christ. And when King writes about his theological views, Chad believes him. But when he writes about his economic views, specifically against communism, then he says, of course, that's what a lying communist would do.
That's a good point. Got to be consistent. Well, good point. Good point. Good point.
Okay. So here's the thing, Delano.
You
can't take it. It seems like this is what you're doing. You're taking completely out of the equation the way the communists actually work. And I challenge you genuinely. I'm not saying this to win an argument. I'm not saying this to do a gotcha. I'm genuinely challenging you and everybody watching this right now to actually go and look at communist subversion and how it was actually being carried out over the course of the 20th century. Because the thing is, in order to make sense of a lot of things that I'm saying, because I'm actually listening to myself right now, in order to make sense of the things that I'm saying, you actually have to understand how this kind of monster operates. They don't do it, like they move through clandestine and covert means.
That's true.
They would commonly and routinely have their functionaries and their fellow travelers publicly denounce communism. This would happen on the regular because they were more effective, especially in a place like America, where most people were by and large anti-communist.
You can take what King has said in his writings about his theological views, because based on scripture, that's the standard, right? But you can also take Chad's point about the subversiveness and the deception of how communism and how it presented itself in King's, writings.
Stanley Levison, and by the way, Kamen is not on my side ideologically as well. He's a full-fledged devotee of what he calls social justice. And he's an admirer of King and an admirer of Stanley Levison. He writes that Levison never left the communism as an ideology. He left the party in 1957 when he connected with King, and King knew about his communism. He left the party, but he never left the ideology. He remained a communist till the day that he died. And so like the standards that you lay out as far as what would qualify him as a communist, I get where you're coming from, but I would challenge you to look at how communism, the subversive means by which it spread, and you'll see that King was doing exactly that.
Again, I think you are making a conclusion where an argument needs to be. At a certain point, you have to have evidence, and the evidence can't be, well, he's lying, therefore that proves that he's a communist. That just doesn't hold to me. Again, I'm not saying that King or anybody else in the civil rights movement had to say, I am a communist. That would be silly. You and I, because we would agree on that. But I'm looking for the markers. Now, if you said,
But
hey,
he provided the markers.
Dr. King advocated for sort of a classless, stateless society, if he advocated for the abolition of religion or the abolition of the family, then I could say, okay, now we're on to something.
They don't have to
I've
be
never
on
heard
the
you
things.
say those things.
They don't have to
What
be
I
on the
do
things,
hear
though.
you do is engage in guilt by association. And again, my question is this a principle that you carry across the board? I'm an equal weights and measures kind of guy. Because it is easy to say, well, this person advised this other person, and because of that, the person being advised, therefore, automatically adopts the entire ideology of the advisor. I don't know if that's an argument that can be sustained as you carry that through time. So again, I've seen and heard you do this often, right? It'll be, no, King won't say he's a communist. He says, in fact, that Christianity and communism are incompatible. Your response would be, well, he plagiarized that speech. My response would be, okay, strange tactic for a person who believes something and really wants to see something happen, to publicly say, no, I don't believe in this thing, and these are the reasons why. And this is why I go back to answering the original question, whether I think King was a Marxist, socialist, or a critic of capitalism. Certainly he was a critic of capitalism. Everybody is. Democrats, Republicans, I mean, they just criticize it in different ways. But if the bar is that any critique or criticism of capitalism makes you a Marxist, then what I'm saying is you're going to sweep in far more people than you realize.
I apologize again, but I think he's arguing more than he criticized capitalism. He's saying that part of his argument is guilt by association. You run with communists, avowed communists. I'll apologize for using my stupid analogies again, but it's like, man, I used to run around. I had friends that were pimps. And when I ran around with them, you could make some assumptions about me that would be actually true.
Is one of them that you were a pimp?
If someone made that assumption, I would deny it, but I go, I see why you're making that assumption.
Of course you would deny it. That's what pimps do. You see where this goes?
I got it. I couldn't be offended by it because I'm running around with guys that were pimps. And so if people wanted to draw all kinds of conclusions about me because of that and what I think about, what I thought about prostitution and all that other stuff, like Whitlock must be in support of prostitution. He runs around with pimps.
Isn't Jason supposed to be a moderator, though?
If people looked at me,
Am I missing something?
I'm not Dr. King. I'm not some huge religious leader, but I do promote Christianity.
That part.
And so if I'm still running around with them same guys, and that's still who I'm talking to most often, rather than Virgil and other people, and my friends haven't changed, I wouldn't blame people. Man, Whitlock, guilt by association, I kind of believe it. My father believed in it. You need to quit running with them Negroes, but they into this and that. Everybody
Really?
I know believes that. But anyway, I don't.
But you run with Anton Daniels, who.
Anyway,
let me.
I think you actually hit the nail on the head. But I do have a question for you, Delano.
Sure.
Obviously this is part of one of the 5 questions that we are going to get to. But was Martin Luther King a Christian?
You want to skip down there?
No. I'm going somewhere with this. But
Do I believe he was a Christian?
yes, was he a Christian?
The stated views on core Christian doctrine that I've seen from Dr. King, from the writing of his own hands, put him, in my perspective, outside of biblical orthodoxy. If he never repented from those views, then I would not see him as someone who was spiritually regenerate.
Okay.
So I would answer that question in the negative. If he never repented.
Okay.
I don't know where he was on his last days. I don't know
come on,
how
Delano.
his views evolved.
Come
from
on,
when he was in
Delano.
seminary.
Come on,
But again,
Delano.
I actually believe what he writes.
So if by what you just said, if King wasn't a Christian, what then do you want me to do with the statement that you just put out there, that King said that there's no companionship between Christianity and communism? What am I to do with that if he wasn't a Christian?
I don't think you have to be a Christian to make that argument.
Good point.
So what am I to do with it
Good
then?
point.
I mean, you
Nothing.
could either believe it or not believe
Right.
it.
No,
That don't mean
clarify
that's-
your question.
Right, yeah.
I don't
Make your
fully
point.
under- what
That
do
makes
you
no-
do
that makes
with
no
it? What do you
sense.
mean? You're
So-
saying it's incompatible.
Right.
Right. So he said earlier that Christianity,
And you don't have to be a Christian to
that
say
King
that.
said Christianity is incompatible with communism. This
Therefore, King's not a Christian. You're saying he's not a Christian, so he's actually very compatible with communism.
precisely. That's exactly the point.
But you don't have.
So if
No.
what am I to do with this argument that, well, King said that there's no companionship between Christianity and communism, that they're incompatible. And you say that to say what exactly?
I'm saying that to say that the charge that you level against him of being a Marxist,
But
communist,
it insinuates that he's a Christian, though. Do you
well,
see what I'm saying?
he may very well have seen himself that way. You're asking me to judge his sort of
That's what we do,
spiritual
Delano.
fitness.
That's what we do, Delano.
60 plus years.
That's what we do, Delano, based on the
you know,
scriptures, bro.
He drew his last breath.
Come on, bro,
And
based on the scriptures.
All I can go on is the things that he said. So if I hear somebody who says, "No, I profess to be a Christian, but I reject, substitutionary atonement. I object the bodily resurrection of Christ," I would say, "Well, you that don't sound Christian to me."
Well, you.
Now,
that's
that speaks to whether. But again, but
Why is
I
that so
think
hard to
these
say,
are slightly different things, because someone can feel that they're a true believer.
Feel?
Right?
Doesn't matter
Someone
what
can
one
be
feels.
no. But then that's a different question, because God is the ultimate judge. And what I'm saying is someone can be sincere in their beliefs,
Wow.
but their faith not be genuine.
That's why we have the Word. That's why we have the
Right,
Bible.
right. But
But
none
you're
of
not
that
holding to the word either, though,
discounts
Chad.
the fact that he was making a claim
Man.
that one of the core tenets of communism is the rejection of organized religion. It's not just ambivalent to organized religion, it's hostile to it. And he was writing that this is one of the reasons why communism and Christianity are incompatible. Now, your response to that is almost never, or not just, "Oh, King wasn't a Christian." Your response typically to that is he plagiarized it and he was lying. But what I'm saying is, when King writes about his theological views, which you and I would both argue put him outside of biblical orthodoxy, those things you believe.
Yeah, it's actually a moot argument, because the thing is, again, yes, I do tend to go to he plagiarized that, because he did. I mean, anybody can go read the book right now. It was written in 1951 by Robert J. McCracken, called Questions People Ask. And specifically on the question of communism, if you read what he said and if you read what King would later say about it in 1957 and then throughout the remainder of his years, he's actually copying, in some cases verbatim, and then in other cases ideas that originated with McCracken. And so that's a disingenuous piece as far as I'm concerned, because when you look at the fact that communists are utilitarians, and not only that, they lift ideas and they lift talking points and slogans from all over the place. It's kind of like an amalgamation of different things to kind of get into the good graces of the people. That is in fact the ultimate goal. Let me say the thing that's going to resonate with the most people to then push a sinister agenda. That's part of their framework. That's part of what they do. Lenin himself said that it's not above us to lie, to steal, to do whatever we can, so long as we can push our goal, push our agenda. And of course, I'm paraphrasing him. But again, King was part of this kind of this framework. Is part of this kind of milieu. And to say, Delano, I'm going to put this out there one last time. To say, well, King said that communism and Christianity are incompatible. The insinuation when such an argument is made that King himself was a Christian, therefore he was saying that there's no way that he can actually have companionship with communists. There's no way that he can actually have camaraderie with people who possess or who hold to or who are devotees to the communist ideology or the communist agenda. That's the insinuation that's being made. And so that's the reason why this kind of association piece is important. I understand that in academia, the fallacy of guilt by association is typically dismissed. I understand that. But here it actually does apply, because per you, King himself said that there's no companionship between Christianity, there's no compatibility between Christianity and communism. So why is it that the number one financier of the Communist Party and of Soviet action in America, why is that the leader or basically your most trusted advisor? You don't have to take my word for it. Again, go read Dangerous Friendship. Again, somebody who's not ideologically on my side wrote the book. You can actually get into the kind of inner circle, the kind of inner conversations between the two of them. Why is it? According to the most recently released FBI files, you find that there's a line of communication between the SELC and the USSR, communicating by way of Soviet intelligence assets, communicating by way of intermediaries. Why is there that connection there? And again, King knew about this. It wasn't as though he was just this hopeless, this blind, deaf, and dumb puppet who didn't know anything. You know what I mean? He understood the connections that Leveson had, and that's exactly why he was so willing to trust him as an advisor. Go where he said go, do what he say do, say what he said say.
So he was a puppet. I mean, that's
He was a puppet, but he wasn't a blind puppet. He was fully aware of what was going on.
In any of these FBI communications, do we have Dr. King on record as, again, stating he either wants to abolish the family, abolish organized religion?
You don't have to say that in order
a
to be still
complete
considered
federalization of
communist.
industry, a classless or stateless society. Is there any evidence of that in the secret, not the public, in the secret communications?
Yes, of course. If you look at, I'm not sure about the FBI files per se.
Okay.
I can't remember where I read this, but people can find where King is talking about, especially in 1967, 1968, in their private SCLC meetings, he's talking about the goals of what they call democratic socialism, which do include some of those planks that you lay out.
Which
so,
one
of course,
specifically?
He's talking about, for example, the nationalization of industry, a classless society. He's talking about
And that's a term he used because again, this is now we have a debate, and neither of us has resources in front of us. So I like to be very specific on terms, right?
Wow.
I want to know. Give me as close as a characterization of what he was saying when he was talking about a classless society. Because if you're going to say, well, what he was saying is he wanted to get rid of income inequality, that's something very, very different. So what was it that he was actually saying?
Well, you don't even have to look at the private conversations. I mean, if you look at, for example, the speech that he delivered to Stanford, which is interesting, just to take it back real quick to the I Have a Dream speech, where he's talking about 100 years after emancipation, the Negro still is not free. And he says 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. And then again, he ends the speech, free at last, free at last. And so the question then becomes, well, how then must the Negro get his freedom? And he had the opportunity to answer that question again and again and again. And so when you look at the Stanford University speech, the same speech where he says that he's against riots, but in a real sense, riots are the language of the unheard. So again, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, and he's saying that it's actually the conditions, blaming the quote unquote system, that led to the Negro rioting in the streets. And he says, if the Negro is to get his equality, we must have wealth redistribution and the guaranteed annual income and all these things for poor people. And so while I take the fact that you said, well, this conservative is for the UBI and that conservative is for the UBI, like, to me, that means very little, especially when you consider all of the other realities surrounding King in terms of his education, in terms of his father, and the fact that his dad would frequent these communist front organizations in the South before King was born. He was part of, again, this framework and this milieu. When you consider, again, the interaction and the correspondence, much of which are available right now in the King papers. I think there's 7 or 8 volumes of them. When you consider, again, who were his most trusted advisors, not his associates, but his advisors, most trusted advisors who did have the communist ties. And when you look at the way, again, that communist functioned throughout the Cold War in terms of of their fellow travelers, in terms of their dupes of subversion, in terms of their functionaries, in terms of, I forget the other two categories that they put you in. But when you look at this and you look at the civil rights movement, and then you look at the correspondence, and then you look at the FBI files, it's undeniable.
I'm still waiting for you to tell me, again, I'm asking, and the reason I ask about the private correspondence is because I could go with you that a person may say, you know what, I'm not gonna advocate for certain things publicly, but privately, then you can see what I really believe. And I've yet to hear you say, right? King was saying, again, I'm looking at some of the markers, particularly of Marxism. I've heard him speak, and I've seen him write. I've read things that he's spoken in terms of advocating democratic socialism. But if you ask 100 political people what is democratic socialism, some may say, oh, you know, some of the Scandinavian countries practice it, some other countries practice it. Some may say it can be large social welfare spending within a larger context of free market, you know, capitalism. Some may say, well, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, publicly funded police departments, fire departments, these are all democratically socialist, you know, policies and programs. So there's going to be difference there. But again, if you're bringing a charge against a man, and it's a heavy charge, the evidence should be overwhelming. And that's why I'm asking you, and this is where we go from the characterizations. This is where we go from the associations, from using words like nefarious and allowing people to sort of,
well, it must be,
hold on.
It must be said real quick though, that not all the correspondence, the private conversations are released. I don't have access to that.
Also, I just wanted to define evidence for me. Is it statements of facts, or can what is ever? Because, and I'm gonna go back to a real world example.
Okay.
Again, you've been with Fearless from the outset, and so you've seen me partner with Anthony Walker, Virgil Walker, T.J. Moe, Gaston Mooney, Bobby Harrington, Tyler Carden, and it's like I'm trying to influence the culture through the Fearless deal. You've heard me talk about like, hey, these are the things I like about you, Delano, and your background that fit what I'm trying to do. And so I just rattled off the names of from TJ to Gaston to Anthony Walker, Virgil, blah, blah, blah. So I've rattled off 6 names.
right.
If 3 of my closest advisors during the time you were on Fearless, if 3 of them were flaming gays, would you not make some assumptions about me and what I was trying to accomplish here?
I would. That would be an interesting sort of group of friends.
You would make some assumptions. If they were instrumental parts of what I was doing, these are the people that I talk to on a daily basis about what I'm doing, what we're trying to accomplish. They're giving me advice. If 3 of them were gay,
right,
you would be like, man, there's some evidence here that Whitlock's not trying to live out this biblical stuff he's talking about. Well, that would be seen as evidence. My actions. You're talking about, do we have King on record saying, hey, I'm a communist and I want to destroy the family? Does he say that anywhere? He doesn't have to. He's associated with communists who want to destroy Christianity, religion, the family. They want to subvert America.
But that's not what he was advocating for. That's my point. So if you
his actions. I could come on this show right now and say I'm pro-Christianity.
Correct.
Notice.
My right-hand man is a flaming gay guy.
Notice.
Right.
Notice.
That would contradict, and people would be like, man, I don't believe Whitlock. Whitlock ain't telling the truth.
Okay,
Let's trying to convert them to Christianity.
Hold on, but let's flip it around. If you were saying, I'm pro-gay, I'm pro-LGBT, but your closest advisor was a Christian, then what would be the conclusion I should draw?
That would be he's contradicting himself.
But the contradiction, you can say there's a contradiction between who you hang around and the things that you say publicly. What I'm saying, that's different than saying than who you hang around. That's different than saying that your associations are going to always color your actions.
What?
Because again, if you were saying I'm pro-gay, but then people said, Whitlock's 3 closest advisors are Christian, I wouldn't therefore say, well, then Whitlock must be Christian. I wouldn't say that. And I don't think you would say that.
I would think you would say, though, I think gays would say, man, I don't know if he's really sincere about that. or he'd have some gay people up there advising him.
This is crazy.
And
But what would the Christians say? That's the question.
Crazy.
what would Christians say?
Correct. Would they accept you because you have advisors who are Christian, even though you are promoting?
I would hope that if I were on this show promoting gayness, I would hope that Christians wouldn't watch.
Okay.
And as a Christian, again, didn't RuPaul have a show at some point? I never watched.
But,
Don't have an
wait a
interest in
minute.
Right.
And
Jason had Glenn Beck on his platform talking about Jesus, and Glenn Beck is a Mormon. He just had Anton on
Let's
his,
tie it
on
together
his
then, 'cause we
podcast
have-
defending Anton's sinful behavior as a professing Christian. Stop.
That the example you gave, there's a contradiction between the advisors and what the principal is saying in public. And what you said is that you would hope that Christians, right? Now, these are the people who would be in the tribe of the advisors. You would hope that they would not watch. The parallel would be, okay, King, I'm using Chad's argument. King is being advised by communists, but he's not promoting communism. He's promoting the
You keep taking the Cold War element out.
Hold on.
Okay.
Let me just. He's promoting the eradication of Negro second-class citizenship and calling for civil rights laws that respect the Negro's right to vote and public accommodation. That's what he's promoting. And in the example you gave, the people who would be frustrated would be the communists. In the example you gave, the people in the background.
There were people, and Chad could make this argument, but it's not Chad. There were people in real time, black Christians, who could see what he was doing and the phoniness and the fraudulence of what he was doing. And they were being outspoken. Is it Joseph Johnson? Is it
Jackson.
Joseph Jackson. And they were being critical, and they were silenced and ignored, no different than black conservatives like us. The mainstream media, we sit there and say, hey, no, man, go to graduate high school, get married, have kids, blah, blah, blah. And we get ignored, and we can only get on platforms in certain places.
Right.
And that's what happened to Joseph Jackson. And a lot of people, they could see like, no, man, I heard the stories about King and these hoes. I know who he's running around with. I know what they could see through in real time. And these people were ignored and silenced. And the actual communists, the leftists, or whatever, their narrative won out over Dr. King. The only reason why I jump in here is because
No, Jay.
I know that it's a debate.
It ain't.
But
No, it ain't.
and so there are tactics you use during the debate, but the standard of evidence in the court of law, whether criminal or civil, the standard isn't, well, it's not evidence unless OJ comes out and says, I killed Nicole Brown. We can ignore everything else. We never have him on.
Forensic evidence, eyewitness. There's more to evidence than just a person stating something. So to answer your question, I
Again,
think
that's the standard you're holding Chad to. He's offering up other evidence.
Well, I'll just say this real quick. It'll take me 30 seconds. So again, according to documented records, the Soviet Union saw the civil rights in America and treated it as what they called a strategic propaganda asset. The same USSR, by way of its intelligence assets, were in constant communication with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which King was the president of. Now, the reason why those words, strategic propaganda asset, are important is because of that strategy piece. So you just said earlier that, he's trying to make it to where black Americans aren't second-class citizenship or second-class citizens and things of this nature. Again, all strategy. And the issue is never the issue. The issue is the revolution. This is one of the slogans that they use. In other words, you saw incremental success on the part of blacks, again, well documented by Soule, Walter E. Williams, and others, from the turn of the 20th century, going into the middle part of the 20th century. These things were actually happening. What did King say in I Have a Dream speech? Now was the time. Now was the time. Now was the time. Basically repeating this mantra of kind of revolution. Now was the time. We're done waiting. We're not going to be patient anymore. He's pushing this kind of revolutionary language of now was the time. Again, when you look at the connection from the USSR to the SELC to the front man who's using and exploiting this particular grievance that is already being handled, but he's exploiting this particular grievance. It's not for what we think or what we're taught it is, that all the races will come together, the skies will open up, rainbows and butterflies. That's not what it was. What it was a strategic kind of component to get to the next phase. King said, after the success of the 1963 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, he said, it's now time to focus on the economic issue. He said, he called it an issue. It's now time to focus on the economic issue.
Okay.
And he's moving into this kind of, again, incremental, slow kind of burn, slow phase of moving us more and more closer to socialism. That was his ultimate goal, Delano. And again, it's well documented.
Can't deny that.
His writings is well documented,
can't
and
deny
a lot of the things that he was doing over the course of the late 50s, early 60s, and into the late 60s.
Let me move on. Third question, and this is another doozy. How important to his legacy is Dr. King's moral failure, the playing around with women and all of that? That's all been addressed here recently and brought out over the last 20, 30 years. Delano first. 3 minutes here.
Sure. I mean, I certainly do think it's important because for many people, especially older generations, they see King as equal rights, sort of civil rights activist and moral leader. So when you hear that someone who you idolize had serious moral failings, and I certainly would put adultery in that category, I do think it taints the legacy a great deal. But I would say, generally speaking, most people see King more in his social role than his theological role. King is not regarded. I mean, to some extent, I certainly have seen how the Black church has sort of moved from what I would call the social gospel. Eventually, you have sort of liberation theology, and that certainly has been a deviation from biblical orthodoxy. But generally speaking, I think people see King as a social leader. And I will say this. For some people, they'll say, you know what? I think his moral failings are a knock against him. Some people will say, but it proves that you don't have to be a perfect human being to do things for positive good. I would argue if the leading preacher, right, and we can put preacher in quotation marks, in America, in, let's say, from 1972 to 2022, right? Preaching against abortion was a man who has some funny theology. Okay. And oftentimes with funny theology comes personal failings. Okay. If that preacher was the person most responsible for getting Roe versus Wade overturned, conservatives will find a way to honor that person in public.
Got a name?
So the notion that
let me tell you why I know you're right. Scott Adams just took a dump on Christianity and died, and conservatives shouted and screamed. Go ahead.
So the notion, and again, part of why I like being able to sit down and talk to Chad face to face, because part of what I'm doing is not necessarily hitting on particular points, it's truing up the scales. The notion that the only people worthy of public honor are ones who have spotless moral records means that there will be few people who are going to be worthy of public honor. If you're a person, I'm just going to give you a time frame, over the last 30 years, who's voted for a presidential candidate, I'm not even going to say who.
I wish you did.
Who is on record of being accused of cheating on his wife, and you'll say, no, that's my guy. Then you have to keep the same standard, equal weights and measures. So while I believe that King's moral failings do taint his legacy, I would argue that holding him to a standard that no other public leader is held to is quite unfair. So I'm not sure if I got any more time left, but I'll stop there.
You do, because what I want you to clarify, because I think you probably have an answer, is King and other people that ministers should be held to a different standard than even presidents.
They could be held to a different standard. Some people would say you hold the president to a higher standard than you hold
Who says that?
Some people would say that.
No, I get some people, but I'm talking about among us three.
I wouldn't, but then again, but if you say King is a fake Christian, then you could treat him like a pagan, like anybody else.
But the Bible says these fake ministers, they're going to face a special...
The fake ministers and the do-gooder non-believer is gonna face the same end. What I'm saying is you can't hold up King as a minister when you want to smack him for his moral failings, and then cast him as a pagan when you want to dismiss him as a moral leader. You have to choose one particular lane. That's what I'm saying. So again, my point is the idea that you can only celebrate people who have spotless moral records means that Mount Rushmore is going to be clear. I'm not talking about the literal, but whoever our Mount Rushmore of social, cultural goats is probably going to be cleared off.
How important to his legacy is his moral failure?
I think it's pretty important for the very reason that his official title was that of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So regardless of how much influence people believe that he had across the globe as it pertains to race relations, so on and so forth, whether we want to use semantics and call him a social leader, the reality is he's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who got his training in theology and who occupied the role of that of a pastor at originally Dexter Avenue Baptist Church there in Montgomery, Alabama, and then he would die the associate pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And so, we read in the scriptures that, those who profess to be teachers will be judged more harshly. We read about what the qualifications of being a teacher, a preacher of the gospel are, or an elder in the church are.
Okay.
And the fact of the matter is King did not meet that standard at all, and nor was he trying to. I mean, King was very sexually loose, and I say that not to be controversial or sensational, but he was. His attorney, his lawyer, Clarence B. Jones, would routinely send women to King's room whenever they would travel and go on tour and give all these speeches. That coincides with what the communists called bedroom politics. Bedroom politics, pillow politics, something like that. But when you see the fact that, there were rumors that were circulating within civil rights circles about King having sex with Bayard Rustin, as well as Ralph Abernathy. In fact, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. threatened King that he's going to use that information against him if he protested the 1960 Democratic National Convention. And King instantly stepped down. And he, for a moment, separated himself from Bayard Rustin, only to reconnect for the 1963 March on Washington. Now, you mean to tell me that somebody who faced down dogs and hoses and all the things, he stood up to that, but when it came to this threat, all of a sudden, let me try to distance myself from that real quick. So for me, it's like, I'm not saying that King did it. I'm not saying that King was having sex with men. I'm just saying that these were rumors that were circulating in civil rights circles. However, the orgies and the extramarital affairs with other women, that is well documented. Right. And I do think that is something that should be considered. And as far as people like to say, well, David, King David sinned. Well, David was a repentant man. We have psalm after psalm after psalm of David repenting of what he did. We don't have any such record of King having repented. In fact, he slept with 2 women who weren't his wife the night before he died. So,
Delano?
I'm not sure if there's a lot of rebuttal here as much as we can just go back and forth, or maybe you do want to rebut, Delano, or...
No, it's interesting because, again, one of my critiques is not just on the substance of what Chad says, because, again, much of it I will concede just for the sake of argument. I don't have all the history books in front of me.
But that's true.
But part of it is the process. So I've brought up guilt by association. I've brought up the use of language to sort of condition the emotions, right? Whether that's the term Marxist or using terms, like nefarious or saying that someone... One of my favorite, Chad didn't say this today because we didn't go so far back, is when Chad said that Abraham Lincoln was infatuated with Karl Marx. I said, man, that's a strong term to use for somebody. But now we get into rumor, and it's drop the rumor, expound on it, and then say, well, I'm not necessarily saying it happened. I'm just saying that that's what people were saying.
Yeah. You're talking about the gay stuff.
Correct, the gay stuff.
Right.
The gay stuff.
Right. You can't
so
do that, man.
It's one of those things where it's just... Again, I get
that was bad
where Chad is going in terms of the ultimate verdict. The process of getting there is one of my issues. But again, I'm not making the argument that Dr. King, and I think most people, generally speaking, when they refer to him, they will call him Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Some things will put in the reverend part, but in many respects, I think it's probably appropriate that part has fallen off over the course of years. But I go back to my other point, which is...
Doctor of what, though?
You said
that the reverend part has fallen off, but the doctorate isn't in a secular study, is it?
Is in theology?
Yeah.
Okay. No, most people...
Come on,
but there's so many people with doctors behind it. Dr. Joe Biden. Not mean nobody.
Come on, Delano. Come on,
the reverend
Delano.
holds much more of a weight when it comes to religious matters than the doctor part. But what I'm saying, going back to my argument, is again, if the standard is clean moral record in order to be held up in esteem, then that's something that we have to hold across the board. Can I ask Chad a quick question?
Yeah,
Chad, do you believe that a person who writes about the virtue of liberty while holding slaves, one, is inconsistent in their practice, and two, immoral in their behavior?
Good question. Good question.
Ask that one more time. I'm sorry.
Do you believe that
Great
someone
question.
who writes about the virtues of...
I don't believe that they're immoral. I don't believe that they're inconsistent.
So you don't believe owning people is necessarily immoral, particularly when you write about the virtue of freedom and liberty?
Well, I mean, when you look at the fact that, and that leads to a very complex and nuanced conversation that I don't think we have the time right now to get into.
No, make time. Make time.
Just since you asked it.
Make time.
When you look at the question of what is and what isn't a citizen.
Come on.
I think that, and then too, when you look at slavery, biblically speaking.
Not biblically, in America.
Right.
Chattel slavery. You know what slavery talking about.
Right?
Stop
Because
playing.
biblically, they weren't writing about liberty in that sense. So let's
Come
say
on, bro.
an American historical figure who writes about the virtues of liberty, but owns slaves. Do you think that person is being inconsistent?
I think it depends on the question, Delano. I think that's why it's tough for me to
No.
answer the question. Because the fact of the matter is, I'm not ready to concede this idea that having a slave is a completely immoral thing to do or to have.
What?
I don't believe that.
Or liberty
whether it's in
Republic.
America or whether it's somewhere in Egypt or
Why do you
Jerusalem.
say
Because I don't think that there's any biblical evidence of the simple owning of a slave as being a simple thing. I don't think. I haven't seen any biblical evidence of that.
I mean, man-stealing was met with the death penalty.
Well, now you're saying man-stealing. Are we talking about slavery or are we talking about man-stealing?
Bro,
that's those two things are certainly in the same family.
I'm about to freaking lose it,
I could say, in the same way, I could say
about to lose it.
communism and
it's a
wealth
violation of the Eighth
distribution are in the same
Commandment. What you
family.
talking about?
I could say,
So Thomas Jefferson stole men?
if he didn't steal them, he bought them. Once were stolen.
Okay.
So
Right.
if that's the
Hot
if you wanna
merchandise,
parse it
bro.
that way,
So
Come on,
buying
man.
a slave is sinful?
I think when you're a person who writes about liberty
gosh,
while
bro.
practicing slavery, there is a vast disparity between your creeds and your deeds.
Facts.
buying a slave is not sinful? This is news to me.
I'm asking
And
a
I'm
question.
What?
I'm asking you.
Yeah, I haven't seen any evidence that it is.
Oh my god, bro! What you?
I haven't seen any evidence that it is. Again,
Is
I
this dude
understand
serious?
how provocative that may sound, and I'm not trying to be provocative.
No,
I'm
I
not
know
trying to be
you're not.
controversial. I just don't believe. The thing is, one of the things that a lot of people really kind of hang over America's head to this very day is this quote unquote sin of slavery. And
Why you say quote unquote when you say sin of slavery?
Well,
you don't think it was a sin.
I say quote unquote because of the overuse.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by that. So, and it's weaponized and it's used time and again as fodder for a political agenda. And so, for me, when Delano takes it back to the founding fathers and he asks the question, and pardon me if I'm misrepresenting your question, but as I understood it, is it wrong or is it sinful to be writing about slavery or freedom and liberty while you are the owner of slaves? Is it okay?
I didn't say wrong or sinful. I said I can't remember the exact way I put it in when I framed it originally, But is it?
Yes, bro.
I might have used the word disconnect. Like, is there a disconnect there? Or is it?
Is there a disconnect?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you look at the
Critical, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what.
when you look at the CVS, when you look at the citizen, like which again goes back to Aristotle, Plato, the question of what is a citizen, right? If a slave is not considered a citizen of a specific nation or whatever the case may be,
What does God consider him, Jay?
that doesn't give you the right to mistreat them. You know what I mean? Mistreat
Wow,
somebody
bro.
who is your slave or your indentured servant or who's in your care or whatever the case may be.
The
So I'm not
difference, bro.
advocating for that by any stretch of the imagination.
It gives you the right to own them.
I hope y'all listening to
Frankly,
this.
I mean, there was so we live downstream of this kind of post-war consensus
Golly.
where
This dude says there's no biblical evidence of this.
and I see you laughing, but
I see it used all the time on X by Christian pastors, post-war.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
But yeah, this post-war consensus, this new idea of this new world where we believe that we're more moral than our predecessors.
Oh,
Yeah. So
Get it.
I don't understand what that reaction
Bro.
is.
What? Yeah, I don't either.
What?
because I take much of what your project is taking Chad Jackson's 2025 values and teleporting them back into the 1960s.
Not so fast.
Okay.
I mean, Jason said it himself. He put out the name Joseph H. Jackson, and it wasn't just Joseph H. Jackson. It was George Schuyler. It was Julia Brown. It was Manning Johnson. On and on I can go. I mean, even Bob Woodson left the civil rights. He's still alive with us today. I think he lives up there where you live.
Right.
Even he left the civil rights movement when he saw what they were up to.
He's not a critic of King, and
so-
I know that. I know he's not a critic of King.
Well, even
in the way that you are.
Be that as it may.
Okay.
The reason why he left the movement was because of what it was doing, and what King himself was doing. Even though Woodson may not be calling King out by name or criticizing him in particular, the reasons he left the movement, as he gives them in terms of the forced integration piece, is exactly what King was doing. So whether he's calling him out by name, it's a non-factor. But the reality of it is, there were people who called him out by name. And these were black people who lived in this time that you're speaking of. And so, yes, I have the curse of having been born in 1990. But does that disqualify my voice? Not so much, because again, we do live in the information age. We have access to information. We have access, King, again, all the King papers. I have all the hard copies, but you can find a lot of it on the Stanford website. You were talking about earlier about the private conversations. Well, shouldn't there be in the private conversations King saying the quiet part out loud? Well, we don't have access to all of those private conversations. In fact, the task force, the church committee in 1976, who issued their report, they even said that they were only able to listen to the beginning, the middle, and the end of hours-long tapes. And so they didn't even have access to that. So,
So they can get the orgies, but they don't have them on record as arguing for some of the things that a Marxist would argue for. But
the point, Delano, is that we can't say, oh, because you're a young man who didn't live during that time, you don't have the right to speak on this subject, which is not what you're saying. But it can very quickly become that argument, because the reality is there were people at the time who were speaking against it, who were being suppressed. These were black people.
agreed.
And I'm speaking in the 21st century as somebody who has access to the information and to the records. And then, too, not just looking at King and the civil rights movement, but looking at the way communism was permeating in those days during the Cold War period. All of these things, all of these parts of the puzzle are worth taking into consideration, instead of just taking King at face value from something that he said in the speech, which, by the way, was not written by him, right? Which was written by people who, guess what? Were part of the Communist Party at some capacity, or in a given era. For Bayard Rustin's case, it was in his youth, and so when you look at that and set that aside over here, to get back to the matter at hand about the whole slavery piece. Yes, we, by way of this kind of new kind of progressive era thought process, this thought process that many of us has been ushered in by way of the progressive era in the early 1920s, which takes something like slavery, which again, I understand how what I'm saying right now in the 21st century, it's really tough to say because it's not a very popular thing. But slavery on its face is not automatically a bad thing.
I would agree with that
and
part.
that has been the case for the overwhelming majority
But
of
American
human
slavery
history.
was.
The rhetoric around it has changed. A lot of the ideas around it have changed such to where now you hear the word slave and it automatically equates to just an atrocity and all the things. And so for me, as somebody who is a student of history, I have to look at everything kind of holistically and not just completely lump myself into this.
But let me push back real quick on something you said just now, because you talked about the fact that in King's day there were black leaders who were opposed to him. I grant that. There were also black ministers. I saw a wonderful conversation between Condoleezza Rice, Freeman Hrabowski, and a woman named Mary Bush on uncommon knowledge with Peter Robinson a number of months ago, where they talked about growing up in Alabama in the 1960s. Condoleezza Rice went to school with the four little girls who were killed in the 16th Street church bombing, and her father was a Presbyterian minister. Freeman Hrabowski sort of marched with the youth march when Dr. King came. So there were also people in favor of it. But with that said, I could say the same thing about sort of early American history and slavery. The idea that slavery was seen as a moral evil is not the function of the 1920s or a post-World War II consensus.
I'm not sure I follow your point.
My point is this: in the same way you can say when King was operating, there were people opposed to him, I could say when slaveholders and slavery was in operation and was seen as normal, there were abolitionists. From the inception of slavery in this country, there have been abolitionists. Yeah. So the notion that came about in the 1920s and we're reading modern values back into that time is one that I think can be thrown out completely. There were always people opposed to slavery. And my question to you is someone who writes about the virtue of liberty while holding slaves, can they be charged as a hypocrite?
Right.
If your answer is no, then we can settle it there. My answer would be yes.
Right.
That doesn't mean that I don't think Thomas Jefferson is worthy of public honor. That means he's a complicated figure, and those complications are baked into the cake. But when it comes to King and people in the civil rights era and black leaders who were sympathetic to him, it seems to be communism is the one unforgivable sin. So slavery we can forgive because people, have practiced it and so on and so forth.
Your analogy falls apart.
How so?
Because for reasons that I just expressed, and admittedly, I don't think I did as great of a job expressing them. But again, for the better part of human history, slavery existed. It wasn't automatically seen as just this terrible, atrocious thing.
There's different kinds of slavery. There's two kinds of slavery.
You have to consider that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you have to consider the fact of the question of what is a citizen.
Why do I have to consider that? Does citizen trump made in the image of God?
Facts.
Okay, so why do I have to consider whether somebody's a citizen?
Because the question of who is and who isn't a citizen is the thing to be considered when one considers like the purchasing of land, who gets to vote.
So again, people are property?
The purchasing of people. I want to press this. And the purchasing of people.
Come on.
Is citizenship the marker by which we say that person can be purchased and that other person cannot?
Answer the question.
Yes.
Let me see if I can jump in here, because where I think this falls apart from even when I heard the original question. I think what he's saying, Delano, is in 1765.
Doesn't matter.
Right.
Thomas Jefferson's around and he's writing about freedom and whatever. He owned slaves. He's doing it.
Was the Bible around in
during a
1775?
time where everybody or a large majority of people thought, hey, slavery's kind of normal, it's global, it's everywhere. And so he's not thinking he's doing anything wrong. And where this analogy started was from the question about King's moral failures. And so if Martin Luther King existed during a time where all ministers thought it was kind of normal to be banging women on the sides and committing adultery and blah, 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 then it would be like, yeah, he's acting just like Thomas Jefferson and those guys, when it was very normal for people around, rich people to own slaves and blah, blah, blah. But for a minister, it's been a long time, I think, since anyone, or maybe never, that everyone thought, hey man, you could be banging this girl and that girl, be married, do this, have parties, hang around with gay people and with people that are practicing a worldview, Marxism, that's completely hostile to Christianity. That's Martin Luther King was doing wrong and talking right when everybody knew, and there was consensus agreement, like, man, sleeping around on your wife and all that, and when you're a minister and you're blah, blah, blah. Thomas Jefferson's writing about freedom during a time where most people thought it's not that big of a deal owning slaves. It's a global phenomenon, and we're actually the leaders of correcting this global phenomenon. Europeans, again, there's still slavery all in the world today. And again,
which shouldn't be a problem.
What?
No.
That's according to him.
Right.
No, it's a very explosive point.
Right.
What you're saying, but it's also a distraction.
No, it is not.
Again, it's like, hey, he's
This dude
the
is
crazy guy that thinks slavery. No. I'm talking about the way it's been interpreted. I'm not saying the way you're arguing.
Okay.
Yes, we can focus on his unique thought, which I had never heard until today. But now when I think about it and I go, oh, I might have to go back into this Bible and look deeper and wonder why. I wonder why the Bible wasn't more outspoken against slavery if it's this big horrible thing. He's opened my mind. I don't know where I'm gonna land on this, but
Lord
it's like
have mercy.
I'm going to
These
go to
people
the
are
Bible
ignorant,
because
bro.
if it was this bad and this unforgivable, I think God would have spoke against it.
I mean, this New Testament scripture on slavery. There's an entire book.
Well, the treatment
on
the prohibition against chattel slavery.
A man who owned a slave, who ran away, who Paul wanted that man to accept as a brother in Christ. But I take your point about adultery, Jason, but let me switch the charge, because the main charge that Chad levels against Dr. King is not that he's adulterous, right?
In this part of the conversation,
in terms of moral, we're talking about moral failings, but even in your recounting it, part of it is the Marxism. And if the argument...
that what in this segment of the deal, when we were talking, now, I'll let you go there.
Okay.
Because it's right. You're right. Overall, that's part of his moral failure.
Okay.
But what we were talking about here, basically, Chad went on a long dissertation about him maybe banging men, certainly sleeping around on his wife, and all that other stuff. Chad was talking about the sex part.
Right.
During this, when we opened up the question. Now, you want to bring Marxism into it, go ahead.
Right.
But you're taking Chad a bit out of context
Jason
in terms
is
of
a
what we've been talking
horrible
about the last 15 minutes.
Am I the only one?
I'm sure Chad would say that promotion of Marxism in and of itself is a moral failing for a minister. I don't have any problem. Okay, so we stipulate that. But what I'm saying is, if the argument is also that Marxism was commonplace in America, far more commonplace than we understand, right? Then I can make the same argument. Oh, this is something that's common. So he's not really all that different. And I reject both of those arguments. The notion that something is more or less moral because a bunch of people do it, I mean, again,
I wasn't putting a morality scale.
No, I'm speaking to Chad's argument, and I'm bringing it up because I didn't just drop this as some gotcha. I said part of what I'm doing is to true up the scales, and if the argument is when we see a vast difference between a man's creeds and his deeds, that in and of itself is sufficient to dethrone him from public honor. I'm just asking Chad whether he holds that position consistently. Yes. And I respect Chad's response, which is, I don't really see slaveholding as something on the level of practice. I don't see owning slaves on the same level as advocating Marxism. Would you agree to that particular characterization of your views?
And I would have to amen and agree with that.
Okay.
Marxism is going to cost you your salvation.
Okay. But
men
stealing won't?
Ideology is going to cost you your salvation. Chad is arguing, I'm not so sure if slavery is going to do it. Man. You might get shocked when you get to heaven and see Thomas Jefferson and somebody else up there with you. That's his argument. And again, I'm going to have to go to the Bible. I don't know what I think.
Should have been to the Bible.
Well, I mean, and thank you, Jason. I think you... I'm seeing now as a debater, I need to find a quicker way to kind of get to my points. But at the same time, there is something to be said about, again, this long kind of lost component or portion of history where the argument over who is and who isn't a citizen was something that was considered, once again, in ancient Greece and even the French Revolution, and even during our own kind of coming up with our Constitution. And so, no,
Man.
I don't really think it was hypocritical for Thomas Jefferson to have slaves and while at the same time writing about liberty and justice, especially, I mean, sure, there's rumors
And impregnating a
around,
girl.
him having raped one of his...
Sally Hemings.
I don't know if you're familiar with
Say
this.
her
Sally
name.
Hemings. I was going to bring it up, but you did, so I'll.
Yeah. So of course there's rumors of that, and then of
Rumors?
course, there's
Ain't no rumors, a
or
fact.
There's rebuttals to those rumors, but the reality of it is,
Wow.
again, I'm not somebody who even holds the founding fathers to a kind of deity kind of platform. I'm someone who believes that we are to worship God, not man. I am grateful for the fact that when you look at all of the things that they were up against in terms of coming up with our federal constitution, I tend to be more aligned with the anti-federalists. Again, Patrick Henry's, your Luther Martin's, your Robert Yates and others who believed in a small government. And so what communism does is it comes along and not only does it want to expand government, but it also wants to really push the communist ideology. I mean, as you read in the Communist Manifesto, Marx writes about how the communists basically team up with any party or any platform across the country so long as they can push their agenda. Vladimir Lenin writes about the same thing. Joseph Stalin even writes about this. And so this is Mao in his red book. This is what they do. And so, like, for me, like, I understand that you have very rigid and very, dare I say, academic kind of semantic, well, if it doesn't really fit perfectly into this box, then it just doesn't really hold weight when it comes to whether King was a Marxist or whether he was a communist or whatever the case may be. But what I'm simply saying is, even though we don't have King on the record saying, I am a communist, I want to destroy America, we have to look at all these other things that were going on with him and around him in order to make it this kind of deductive conclusion of what it was the civil rights movement was actually about. And it wasn't about making America better. It wasn't about liberating the Negro. It wasn't about advancing the gospel. It wasn't about any of those things. It was about the adding the extra S to the USA, quite frankly.
So, can I respond? So, one, I think you and I could both agree that neither of us is arguing to deify anyone, right? So this is not, I'm not asking whether or not you hold Jefferson up as a god, as a demigod. I'm using the term public honor. So this is the ability to offer praise and respect for someone who, despite their flaws and imperfections, did something that was primarily for the public good, right? For the general good.
I think you need to define what the flaws were.
I'm trying to press in on this because
Define what
you
the
keep
flaws
going
were.
back to this issue of citizenship. And I heard you say, okay, the citizenship Trump being made in the image of God. And you said no. And on that, I would agree. But again, whether the African was a citizen or not, he was a man. He was a person
Made in the
image of God.
Facts.
And if what the Marxist says is, no, we want to steal the fruits of your hard-earned labor, and we say that is a sin that we should condemn. Okay, yay and amen. But if the slaveholder is saying, I want to take your body, and yeah, it's great if you got a nice little family, you got a wife, and you got your kids. Who cares? You're coming with me. And in fact, actually, she's coming with me.
Right.
And because I own her, she's my property, that's what slavery is, I can do with her what I want. And then I'll go to worship at church on Sunday.
Come on.
So the notion that we say, well, this was commonplace in the world, so you can't condemn it. And really, the sin was federal overreach. Nah, I'm sorry. That just doesn't hold up. And that's why you keep going back to citizenship, because I could just ask a simple question. If an American today goes somewhere, right, or has someone who has been on the losing end of sectarian conflict in their home country, and that person is brought here, an American today purchases this person, owns them, and can do with them what they want, would you argue that that is moral since the person being purchased is not a citizen?
Here's the bottom line.
No, answer the question.
Slavery, in the fact that some slaves were auctioned, some slaves may have been kidnapped, or a lot of folks even voluntarily wanted to go over to other
That's the difference,
plantations
but
and so on
he's
and so
moving the
forth. So
goalposts.
the logistics in which, and the ways in which, slaves were being moved about, it seems that you're kind of, you're camping out on this notion that that the slaves were stolen and that they were brutally sold in the marketplace through the auction block. And that's just not the case. That's not historically accurate. That's in fact ahistorical. Of course, anytime we talk about slavery or we learn about slavery in our public schools, you see, of course, the poor old slave sitting up there with chains on. He's sitting up on an auction block and you have a bunch of white men standing around him. So that's kind of what people think of when they think of slavery. And so again, for me,
He moving the goalposts.
And I apologize for jumping
moving the
in here,
goalposts.
but I'm jumping in
You been jumping in.
because I think that you're being put in an unfair deal. That there'll be clips coming out of this that like you're out here defending.
Right.
Weak moderator.
And,
Come on.
and I think it's
Illegal
unfair
moderation.
to
Illegal moderation.
MLK
Golly.
1960s.
Are y'all hearing this?
But we got to go back to the 1700s.
Clear question, bro.
To really understand him and frame him up against, because we're having a conversation about slavery and not MLK. And I'm going to be humble enough to say that it's like when I hear you talk about this citizens deal, it's like the first time I heard Royce White talk about usury and the Federal Reserve being this detriment to the United States. And it's like, man, I'm going to have to do some research on that because I really don't understand what he's saying, or I'm not familiar. It's a new way of framing the conversation.
Well, put simply, like it.
But hold on for a second, because I want to stop the slavery debate because I think it just, people are, well, this man's defending slavery.
No, this wasn't.
And
Right, he is.
That's all they're going to hear.
Right.
And we're here to have a conversation about MLK. And I think this framing of it is, and again, I'm doing this I want people to come at me.
Right.
And everybody can have a problem with me, and Whitlock's choosing sides, and Chad is on the ropes, and I'm stopping him from getting beat up. And to some degree I am, because I know how people interpret things. It's like, I'm telling you, and this is humility. Royce White used to talk over my head, and it took me a long time to catch up.
This dude, it's a grown man,
you are so well researched, and I think some things you're talking about are certainly over my head, and I think some of the audience, all they're going to hear is, man, this man's up here trying to defend slavery.
Yeah.
And that's not what you're trying to do. So I'm going to move us to the next topic. And ask, is it fair to consider MLK Jr. a Christian heretic? Chad, you go first.
Well, absolutely it is. I mean, again, King wrote that he rejected the deity of Christ. He rejected the resurrection of Christ. He rejected the virgin birth. He rejected the literal existence of hell. I mean, these are all things that he wrote about in his papers. He said that he shocked his Sunday school class at the age of 13 or 12, rather, whenever he denied the resurrection of Jesus. And it was interesting because his father was a pastor. In his unpublished memoir, Daddy King, they called him, wrote that he was a proponent of the social gospel. So admittedly, I haven't heard a whole lot of sermons from Daddy King, but I do know about some of his involvements in some of the circles that he rolled in and some of the things that he would do when King was born and during King's childhood. And so it makes sense then why King would end up going off to Morehouse University or Morehouse College and then Crozer Theological Seminary, where he said, where he wrote that this is something that I can get behind in terms of this gospel. He said, I rejected the fundamental gospel, but the social gospel is something that I can actually get behind. So he rejected what the Bible actually says about who Christ is, how Christ was born, what Christ came to do, the fact that Christ himself is the Son of God. He rejected all of that, but he accepted what Walter Rauschenbusch and what these other Marxist and leftist theologians had to say
Bro,
about the
this is
gospel.
a double team, bro.
And it is
This ain't no
that
debate.
gospel that he said that he would actually preach to the world. And so it wasn't a thing where, King he just didn't know any better. He never heard the gospel. He never was exposed to the truth about Christ. And he only had a liberal interpretation of what the gospel is. That's not the case at all. He outright says that he rejected it. And so for this reason, he knew what heresy was, and he took on the preaching and the teaching of something that is not what the gospel actually is and what the Bible actually teaches. So yes, for that reason, I think King is 100% a heretic. Not only that, he said shortly before going over to receive the Nobel Peace Prize that he believes that God actually shows himself in all the world religions, that God doesn't just exist in Christianity, he exists in all the world religions. That's that's a Sunday school heretical claim because it goes against the very first commandment, that I am the Lord your God, that you shall have no other God besides me.
Oh, so he knows the first commandment, but don't know the eighth commandment?
All the other world religions is just complete heretical. So,
Delano, is it fair to call MLK Jr. a Christian heretic?
If the positions on Christian doctrine that I've seen from Dr. King, and Chad articulated them, so I won't repeat because he hit all the ones that I would hit. If those positions are not ones that he repented of and embrace biblical theology, I think it's more than fair to call him a Christian heretic. Those are not things where there are sort of slight differences in theology, right? The Baptists say, we baptize on profession of belief. The Presbyterians say we baptize babies. Okay, some differences there. Some people debate whether women can be deacons or not, so on and so forth.
Yeah, but that's two different
But
differences.
if you
bro.
deny the bodily resurrection,
Right.
then your faith is in trouble. So again, is it possible that Dr. King turned from those ways and began to embrace more biblical theology? Certainly it's possible. I don't know what was in the man's heart or in his mind or came out of his mouth in his last days. FBI might. I don't. But absent some genuine profession of faith, I think that's a more than fair characterization.
If deathbed, last days, blah, blah, blah. But as a minister, and you've gone out and preached the gospel everywhere, as a heretic, if he did have some deathbed, conversion, he was still a Christian heretic while he was out ministering. He didn't share he didn't accept the resurrection and things like that with the public. So, he's just a Christian heretic, no?
Well, I mean, when I think of using a word like heretic or heresy, right? If a preacher, that's a sin, right? To say things about God that are not true, to say things about God that the Bible doesn't say is a sin. If a person repents of that sin, then they would be in right standing with God. That doesn't mean lessen the damage of their previous teachings, right? And I would argue that the teachings, and Chad has made this point, were largely around social issues, less around biblical theology. But some of those social issues are positive. In the book that I wrote, in my forthcoming book, I quote King, where he's talking about how the family is the most important institution in the country, and the fact that, I'm paraphrasing, but this is what he was saying, the fact that American families are beginning to fall apart is bad for the civilization. That's a beneficial message. And I think, particularly living in this cultural or social context, where people are expecting their pastors not just to speak to social issues, but oftentimes to become explicitly political. And this is a bipartisan charge on both the progressive left and the conservative right. So this notion that, the only things we want to hear about when we go to church is Jesus is not something that, certainly not the people who live today, actually stand by. So yes, to your question, would the damage be done? Yes. But do I think that God would accept genuine repentance from someone who formerly was a false teacher? Of course. Paul was a persecutor of the church and gave the green light for people to be stoned in Jesus' name. And God used him to write a good bulk of the New Testament and the majority of the epistles. So I don't think Dr. King he's not above the law, but he's certainly not below it either.
And I'll start with Chad, which I already think I know the answer to, and so it'll probably be point. But if, let's say Dr. King was a preacher for 20 years, and he was a heretic for 19 years and 11 months and 20 days, does that eliminate him from being a force for good?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, in the grand scheme of things, yes, because you have to look at the body of work and you have to look at the effects and the impacts of that body of work on culture and on society. And you have to look at that and use that as a kind of, and use a objective gauge to determine, whether it was a net positive or a net negative. And the reality of it is, the state of Black culture, which isn't completely in the dumps, but when you look at just the kind of morale of Black culture post the civil rights industry, compared to after or pre the civil rights industry, it's just a night and day difference. And I say this all the time, that King, through his rhetoric, took Black culture from a trying people to a crying people. And it wasn't just him, it was James Baldwin. It was that whole contingent who, through their writ, through their rhetoric, through their oratory, really kind of taught Black people the art of complaining, and how there's political power in complaining. There's political power and really kind of using those grievances for some kind of advantage. And what the Civil Rights Movement and what the Civil Rights Acts have done in effect is it made Black Americans a kind of protected class. And this has not been to our benefit. And so in a real sense, when you look at the important work that Delano is doing through writing about the family and writing about the importance of fatherhood and writing about these things.
So, Puny, did they remove my comment? Am I flagged or something like that? What's going on?
We promote someone like a King, because the fact of the matter is, when you look at the way that Black men operated in those days, I mean, this my grandfathers were like this, my great grandfathers were like this. They were quintessentially men.
Tell me if you see that comment. I put a testing on there in the group.
They didn't
in the chat
beg,
room.
and they weren't concerned about political legislation.
Let me know if you see my comment, Puny.
To make
I see it on the
their
screen.
way in life, right? These are men who worked in rural Arkansas and rural Oklahoma. These are guys who did what they needed to do to put bread on their table. They weren't concerned about some activists marching for them. And so the reality of it is, I mean, for me, I was given a speech one time, and I was asked about the legacy of Martin Luther King and whether the legacy is worth preserving. My answer was, I don't believe that the legacy of King is worth preserving. For me, I believe that my father's legacy is worth preserving, and his father's legacy is worth preserving. That's the legacy I'm concerned about, because it is through those means that I'm able to see, oh, I have the means and I have the wherewithal to cast down my bucket where I am, to be the man that I'm called to be, to provide for myself and to provide for my family. What maintaining the legacy of King does is this kind of government lobbying, this kind of picketing and protesting, and we need to pass the legislation.
Crown Act. We need
a Crown Act.
Hair protection.
And I'll end by saying this: when you look at, and I said this before when I went on your show, Jason, but when you look at the way that manhood was being taught, and I grant what Delano said earlier about the rare occasions where King would say something that makes sense about the family being one of the most important institutions in America. But there were also things that King would say that were counterproductive, that completely was mutually exclusive. For example, Joseph H. Jackson would say that it's on men to be men. He said, God has carefully made you and fixed you just right, and a lot of people in society are trying to change it. He says, no, if you need to be a man. He said, if you're not going to be a man, then braid your hair and start wearing step-ins. We need to be men. It's incumbent upon us to be men, irrespective of circumstances, irrespective of what we think is fair or not fair. We're not to covet or envy our neighbor's stuff. Focus on what you can do to be a man. And this is what Joseph H. Jackson and the NBC were doing.
Be surprised, Puny.
But King would say in an NBC interview.
National Baptist.
I saw your
Convention.
tag too, but I didn't see a comment.
That's what the National
a few
Baptist
minutes
Convention
ago,
was
a few
doing.
moments
But
ago.
King
either.
would,
The TV network.
yeah, but King would go on the NBC, the broadcasting network, and say, well, we can't be men because of conditions, because of housing, because of X, because of Y, because of Z. People can look this 1967 interview up right now. And so you have these two completely different views on what it takes to be a man. One person, Jackson, is saying that you can use the means that you have within yourself and around you, pool resources. You have what it takes to be a man. Whereas King would say, we can't be men. We want to be men, but we can't be men because of our conditions. We have to change these conditions, and after having changed these conditions, then we can be men. And that's a sad and, dare I say, pathetic kind of walk or pursuit of life or way of trajecting through life. And so yeah, I don't really think that the legacy is worth preserving.
Can you be a heretic for a sustained time and be a net positive?
I wanted to respond to what.
I know. I want you to respond to that, and then I'm gonna let you respond to that.
Okay. You said, can you be a heretic for a sustained?
2 decades. Let's say that and be a net positive.
I believe so. I mean, I think this is an example, right? Again, if Dr. King's primary cultural output was his theology, was his biblical theology, then that would be one thing, right? If black folks said, man, I love Dr. King because now I don't really have to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I could just live my life any way that I want. And as long as I'm a good person because I love my neighbor, my white neighbor or my black neighbor, then I'm good, then that would be one thing. But that's not his primary social output. That's not what he's primarily known for. He's not known as a biblical theologian. He's known as a person who rooted his arguments about social change in sort of biblical principles about personhood, that we are all created in God's image and that no man should be treated differently from another man just because of his skin color. So he was arguing against ethnic partiality, which was sort of the cause of the day, whether by policy and legislation or by social custom, right? There's some neighborhoods you couldn't move into because they had restrictive covenants. They could not sell to a black person. And I think he was arguing against that. So do I think any black person who enjoys the right to vote, being able to stay whatever hotel or motel or Airbnb that they want to, being able to sit where they want to in public accommodations, or being able to marry who they want to, I believe has a debt of gratitude to that generation. And I don't think that they have to buy into or accept his theology in order to do that.
Go ahead and answer.
So I'm not going to go all the way back, but one of the things that's interesting about what Chad is saying in terms of being men is that Chad brought up for the first time, I believe, this issue of citizenship. But one of the rights of citizens in this country is to air your grievances and to air them to the people who you elect to represent you. So there's nothing unmanly about black folks saying, we want to air our grievances. And those grievances for my mother-in-law was born in Mississippi. I ain't gonna say how old she is, but she's over 80. She was born in Mississippi, raised in Louisiana. And my wife says her mom talks about what it was like when segregation was ended and how she still wasn't comfortable going and sitting in certain places just because that was not what was done in terms of social custom. So again, this notion that there's something unmanly or infantile about airing your grievances either against your fellow man or against the state and appealing to a higher government authority or a different government authority is one that doesn't square with sort of American history. That's part of what we do. We air our grievances. And I'll say this, not for shock value, but one of the things, Jason, I know you took some heat for, but I think you were strong in your convictions. You said, look, man, them January 6 people, I respect them because they had grievances against the government and they not because they went and shot anybody, but they took their grievances to the people who were aggrieving them. Everybody else gets to do that, except black folk. So when black folk do it, then it's, oh, you're not being manly. You're not standing on your own 2 feet.
Hold on now.
Okay.
People January 6th did some major time in prison. So
Okay.
again, they face some real pushback.
No.
No, I got it. But
I'm not talking about the legal consequences. Here, just understand my point
that's
before.
major pushback. They've been demonized.
No.
They're considered the most racist people on the planet. If you were at January 6th, it's hard to get a job. We air our grievances. We throw bricks, burn cities down, and people get on TV and say, hey, we're doing a fundraiser to make sure we get bail.
I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about, I've listened to Chad characterize King organizing, whether it's young people or adults. I've heard the characterization of the civil rights, the mainstream civil rights movement. I've heard the people who came from the north, down south, outside agitators. I've heard them described as violent, not because they've committed acts of violence, it's because they agitated and then the white police officers used violence to suppress. That's what I'm saying.
That's akin to, using a child as a human shield, quite frankly. And then so here's the reality. I mean, you brought up the lunch counters, you brought up the grievances and connected that to citizenship and so on. Here's the thing, Delano. Blacks weren't clamoring and chomping at the bit to eat a white cheeseburger in those days. This idea that blacks were just, beating down the door of the white school because they wanted to go to school with white children because they believe that they can learn better if they were sitting next to a white child, or that black men wanted to go and sit on the toilet next to a white man, or that, this is silly. It's just silly. This isn't the reality.
And you're saying that based
on
on
the fact that, and so you said earlier,
I would say this, I'm basing it off my parents.
And what I'm saying, you can find black folk whose parents will say something completely opposite. So we could agree that there was a diversity of opinions about the state of play in America vis-a-vis race from the 1940s through the 1960s. I'm going to stipulate to that point.
As I was saying. So again, blacks weren't trying to beat down the door to get into white spaces. To the extent that this became an issue, it was an exploitative thing. And so you say that, we have a right to air grievances. I agree with you. Mm-hmm. But again, you keep conveniently taking out of the equation the way that the communists work, the way that Marxism moves and how it does. I mean, you can look at the work that the Frankfurt School were doing when they came over here to the United States, and they were grafted into Columbia University, and they were really kind of focusing on cultural Marxism and how to exploit grievances. I mean, you can look at all of this and see that when it comes to anything that they can look at and use as a means of sowing discord, it doesn't matter whether those things are already being worked out. My older aunts and uncles in rural Arkansas, some of them went to school with white folks and others didn't. Mm-hmm. My dad comes from 13 brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. Some of them chose, I want to go to that school because they have a good football team, even before integration. And they were allowed to because, again, depending on the local the local town in those days, you had some school districts who really enforced segregation laws, and you had others who didn't enforce it. I mean, it's similar to, for example, in 2020 during the mask mandates. You know what I mean? You had some cities and towns who had very strict mask mandates. I know in Dallas, Judge Clay Jenkins, he threatened every business owner with a fine if they allowed patrons to come in without wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of businesses that defied those rules and defied those regulations. The same thing was happening in those days. I'm not saying that those laws are right. Again, I said earlier in the debate that I'm not for forced segregation, nor am I for forced integration. And this is the reason why Bob Woodson, for example, left the civil rights movement.
That's not a reason, but continue.
Well, he said it in the 1980, I believe, 6 interview with David Hoffman. Okay. That's the thing that separated him from the civil rights movement is the distinction between forced integration and desegregation. Right. And so the reality of it is, when you take this idea that, we do have a right to air grievances as citizens, that's all that King was doing, that's a simple kind of easy and convenient excuse, but the reality of it is it was far deeper than that. It was far more than that. King wasn't just let me do something about the fact that I can't eat a cheeseburger where I want to or drink a cup of coffee where I want to. You still have to take into consideration freedom of association. And so I don't see coercing my neighbor to serve me a sandwich even though he might not like black folks.
Coercing?
As a win. I don't see that as a win.
Coercing?
I'd rather know who the bigots are. I'd rather know who don't like me for the color of my skin, so I don't get my food, clandestinely spat on, or whatever the case may be. I'd rather know who these people are, rather than having people hide behind these laws and being coerced to do something at the threat of having lost their business or whatever the case may be, going to jail. Just because I want to eat
what about if
hamburger at the hands
airlines don't want you to fly on their plane?
I mean, I think that is an oversimplification of the argument that I'm making. It wasn't just about, can I eat a white man's hamburger, right? If a hardworking mom, a domestic, goes into the local, the big box retailer, whatever it was at that time, right? And she wants to buy her daughter a Christmas present, and they're like, "No, we don't serve your kind here," or you have to choose from a different set of presents,
or you can't try on the clothes,
The idea that you're just whining and complaining because you're like, look, I'm a citizen here, right? My family goes back on this land 10 generations, and I'm being treated differently because of my race. And what I'm saying is, I don't think you can have a truly free society where we say we value liberty and we're setting up different modes of treatment for people based on race. That is a simple, so you're right. I haven't read all the books. I don't have all the history. I'm listening to the arguments that you and other civil rights era critical people are making. And I'm just asking whether we are holding this through line all consistently. So it's not just, you don't have to eat a white man's hamburger, you're gonna make your own hamburger. I'm all for do for self. Do I think the civil rights movement ended up with some excesses that have been terribly detrimental to America and to Black America? Absolutely I do. Absolutely I do. Do I think that the Black community is in worse shape in some areas, particularly in the family, than we were in 1965? Absolutely I do. But part of what comes with freedom is the freedom to fail. So you take the freedom. Somebody said, look, we're getting rid of any race-based discrimination laws. Cool, I got the freedom. Now, let's use the family. And I don't want to be intentionally controversial here, but look, I don't want to leave Chad out there by saying controversial things. If Loving versus Virginia comes out, I think 1968, if after that 85% of Black men chose to marry white women, someone could ask the question, was it wrong for Loving v. Virginia to be decided in that way? Or let me say it differently. Was it wrong to get rid of anti-miscegenation laws? And someone would say, based on the output, which is only 15% of Black men marry Black women, yes, it was wrong. And somebody else will say, no, Black men, when you get rid of anti-miscegenation laws, now you can actually have freedom of association. And if Black men choose to marry almost exclusively white women, that's a choice that they have to make. In the same way, if people misuse their freedom, that is a part of being a free people. So there's nothing inconsistent about that. There's nothing unmanly about that. You can both advocate for sort of manly, do-for-self ethos and say you can't have a free society where one group of people is constantly having their freedoms circumscribed because of their skin color. Those two things are not compatible. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so the fact is, it seems, with all due respect, that you're coming from a place of theory.
Theory?
Because the reality of it is the rhetoric. I mean, you have to understand, when you look at somebody like King and James Baldwin and others, and how the media basically contorted themselves, bent over backwards to put these people front and center. And they said, these are the Negro leaders. This is how they would constantly introduce them: Negro leader, Negro writer, Negro poet, Negro. The reality of it is, to the extent, and this is why I brought up Nikki Giovanni earlier, because I think she said something key. Jeez. My generation, we're not business people. We were protest people. We were civil rights people. As Bob Woodson put it, he said it was kind of like you walked outside and there was a storm and the rain started coming down and everybody was talking about the movement. It was really in with the youth, with the baby boomer youth in those days. And so it was something, Carol Swain, I interviewed her, and she said that she lived in rural Virginia. and nobody ever talked about race. Everybody seemed to get along for the most part. But when she turned on the TV and she saw King giving a speech, it was just electrifying. And so the fact of the matter is, you have this thing happening, this trend, this movement. And what is the guy saying? He's talking about the Negro still not being free. He's talking about, we're coming to get our check. He's talking about et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This caused what was really kind of a mindset shift. And you fast forward to today, and you see this kind of smug disposition that many blacks have. This idea of seeing racism, this kind of race paranoia, or what the late Voddie Baucham called ethnic Gnosticism, this kind of seeing racism where there is no racism, this kind of, I'm sure you're familiar with the
have
SCAR.
A problem if Loving versus Virginia was not
study
passed.
That was done in the 1970s?
I think I've heard of it.
Right.
I haven't.
And
we'll go ahead.
So just real quick, so basically, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they put a scar on several people's face, and they sent them in for a job interview. But before they went into the interview, they said, well, let me fix it a little bit. But they actually erased the scar. So the person would go into the interview, and they would feel that they were being judged, and that they were that they didn't get the job because they had the scar, not realizing the scar was never there. And so it was really all in their head. And so I bring that up to say that, sure, some people can say, well, that's what systemic racism has done. It has put us in a place where it made us, feel inferior. But the reality is, how do you account for the fact that you saw this kind of upward mobility that we talked about earlier in the debate? How do you account for that? How did this kind of woe is me mentality skip generations, only to reawaken itself in these kind of young baby boomer militants? And
is it me, or has Chad answered the question that Delano had posited regarding Loving versus Virginia? Which simply was this: would Chad have an issue if Loving versus Virginia were not overturned and it was enforced, miscegenation laws, that you could not marry another person of a different ethnicity? Would he have a problem with that?
Life magazine, Time magazine, Nobel laureate. He's getting all of these accolades, all this attention, and the message is that of bitterness. It's that of grievance. It's that of woe is me. It's that is we need to get our check. It's that is et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This caused what I believe to be this kind of downward trajectory that we would see, that would manifest into what we like. This idea of being a protected class has not. But it has not benefited us well, is the point that I'm making here.
And I apologize, we're not going to get to the fifth question. We're 2.5 hours in. I think it's been great. And I apologize for the parts that weren't great. They were on me. But I want to summarize it and give these guys will have the final word. I want to summarize it by saying what I think my takeaway from this discussion is that Chad is arguing kind of what I believe, that the civil rights movement is exactly what we experienced with the Black Lives Matter movement, that black people en masse were sitting at home having conversation. If you lived in the inner city, man, Pookie and them shot up so-and-so, and these gangs in our neighborhood are causing it to be unsafe. And then on TV, there's this conversation about the police are killing everybody, and I can't go outside because the police may kill me. And then we build a movement, Black Lives Matter, around the police killing everybody, when the reality was
this was a double team.
Our neighborhoods are unsafe. They're controlled by gangs.
This was a double team. This was not a debate. Tell me in the chat. Let me know in the chat. Facebook, YouTube. Let me know. Do you believe that this was a debate or this was a double team? Not that Delano couldn't hold his own, but just tell me what you heard, because it seemed like there was a lot of interjection, a lot of interference by Jason. And he pretty much picked a side, just like he did with Anton Daniels last week in this video.
Up about this, and so it's just, history just keeps repeating itself because we haven't learned from our history. We haven't learned the tricks. And all of this diversity, equity, inclusion, intersectionality, everything race focused, black, blah, blah, blah. It's just a problem. And we spend way too much time not evaluating things from a biblical lens. We evaluate everything through a secular lens, and that leads to a lot of the problems we have. That's my final thought. I'm going to give Chad his final thought.
In the words of Charles Barkley, this wasn't terrible. This was terrible.
Yeah, and I know I didn't even prepare either one of these guys for this, but summarize your final thoughts in 3 minutes. I think that's about how much time I just used there. Put 3 minutes on the clock for Chad. This is unscripted, unprepared. Hadn't had time to think about it, but just your final bowl on this conversation and what you hope people take away. And then Delano will close us out. He'll get 3 minutes, and then show will stop.
Yeah. So I guess thank you, Delano, for this conversation, and thank you, Jason, for hosting it. My final thoughts are that when we look at the civil rights movement, when we look at Martin Luther King and his body of work, we can't take out of consideration the fact that we were in a Cold War period in our history. And we also can't take out of the consideration the fact that the communists moved in a very covert, in a very clandestine way. And we do have the information, we do have the records that what the communists were doing, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in King was very much a part of that. As the records reveal. Again, anybody can go and look at the 2025 MLK files, which were recently released. Anybody can read Ben Kamen's book, Dangerous Friendship. Anybody can read the book Hammer and Hoe by Robin Kelly. All of these are materials that are at our disposal. And so we can't dismiss the reality that this was a Marxist movement by saying, oh, well, King never said that he was a communist. Or we can't say, well, everybody has a right to share a grievance. We can't be so credulous and so gullible to dismiss this very jarring thing that has worked to the detriment of not only Black America, but America at large and Western civilization. We can't ignore the glaring facts because it doesn't meet the kind of sensibilities that we have or that we've been conditioned to have as it relates to King. I mean, we've all been trained to believe that he's this great leader. We've all been trained to believe that if not for King, we wouldn't have rights in America. That's totally not the case. I know that me personally, I owe nothing to King. Again, I want to maintain my dad's legacy. I want to maintain my grandparents' legacy. That's the legacy that I want to maintain, and that's the legacy that you should maintain in terms of your folks, especially if your folks were people who are worth emulating. And if they're not, and even if they are, we're to look to the scriptures. We're to look to what the Bible says about what manhood is and what womanhood is, and we're to basically repent and to.
You know what else we need to look to the Bible to? On what slavery is and what slavery is not, Chad. That's just my thoughts.
Worship King, because if you do, not only are we giving our country away, but we're also giving the church away, and that's quite terrifying.
Delano, floor is yours.
Well, I want to echo Chad's sentiment. Jason, I thank you for convening this conversation. Chad, I thank you for the back and forth, the dialogue. Again, I respect your work. I just fundamentally disagree with some of the conclusions, right? I've stated some of my issues. I think there's been at times intellectual inconsistency. And in fact, if I had to characterize it, I think some of the same things that you talk about and what I would call your 1964 project mirror some of the things that Nicole Hannah-Jones was talking about in the 1619 project. Not the same issue, but some of the same tactics. She sees racism everywhere. You see Marxism everywhere. She believes the founders need to be torn down because their moral failings and inconsistencies have marked and poisoned sort of the evolution of American history since the American founding. And what I hear Chad saying is that the moral inconsistencies and moral failings of King and his generation have done the same thing to Black America since that time. But what's interesting is that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is what any citizen, and the Supreme Court recently ruled this in a 9-0 ruling, that the Civil Rights Act applies just as much to majority groups as it does minority groups. So when a white person feels that they've been aggrieved at work and have been discriminated against based on race, they make an appeal to the governing authorities based on that act. So whether that's a DEI policy or some other policy that they believe is discriminatory in nature, they can say, hey, you can't treat me differently because of my race. And what I'm saying is I think that's consistent. Their application of that is consistent with what King was arguing for in the 1960s. But I think ultimately what this comes down to for me, and one of the things that, one of the reasons why I push back on some of the things that Chad says is because I'm a person that believes in gratitude. And Chad said he owes nothing to Dr. King. That's certainly his perspective. And I respect any man who sees his dad as a hero more than any ball player or politician or civil rights leader. But again, if you're the type of person who wants to live in certain neighborhoods and go to school in certain places and marry certain people, then you owe a debt of gratitude to the people who came before you. And I think if there's one thing that our politics needs less of, it's ingratitude.
That's a good point.
Every victimhood and bitterness is the order of the day. And it's no more righteous coming from the right than it is from the left. I'm going to end with this quote. This is from A Few Good Men. This is, I'm quoting Jack Nicholson's character, Colonel Jessup. When he
he's about to go.
When he was talking to Tom Cruise about, getting the truth.
Like
and he said, I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather that you just said thank you and went on your way. And that is the way I feel when I hear people, anybody basically under the age of 40, casting moral aspersions on the civil rights movement and saying what they would have done if they were in their position. We should just say thank you and go on our way.
I'll never thank anybody for pushing communism, ever. So
that's your argument, and you're free to hold it. You said we were done. You said we were done.
We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Wow. All right, y'all. Let me just ask you all, what did y'all think? What did y'all think in the comments? Let me go ahead and shut this part down. But yeah, I first of all, I would just say this. I didn't see this as a debate. This was not a debate. This was not a debate at all. This was more of a double team, in my opinion. That's just me. But let me know what you think about it in the comment. Let me populate some of your comments. Zarek, you said very inconsistent, but again, this is what you get when people hold to their side more than the truth. The foundation must be correct scriptural exegesis. Nobody did that consistently. Okay, I would definitely. I can definitely see that point. Puny, you said, I said that Chad created a straw man and burned it to ashes. That comment was apparently removed. Yeah, I don't know what was going on, man. I don't know what was going on with that. Them removing the certain comments. It wasn't like anybody was attacking anyone. I mean, even the dude that came at me talking about I must not have studied English or whatever, because I said I didn't hear. He's not answering the question. I mean, Delano asked a clear question. Bottom line, what would you say about the Loving v. Virginia case? Do you think that should have been brought up to the Supreme Court because they were telling people that you couldn't marry, you could marry in the association issues or guilt by association and all of it? It was a crime, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. So were they wrong in defending those rights of who they wanted to marry and who they should love between a man and a woman? Zarek said, Seiko, we live at a point of ingratitude. April, Chad, and many others are simply not thankful. Yeah, again, we should be able to criticize a movement or criticize an organization or criticize a person and still say, okay, you know what? Because my wife and I, we talked about this before. Thank God I was not born during that era. Because there's no way of knowing how I would have responded. Being told I can't sit here, or I can only, eat over here, or I can't, say or look at this person in their eye and they're made in the same image and likeness as me. There's no way of knowing what we would say or respond to that. So again, God is sovereign, and he placed us in the era and time that we were in. And I'm grateful for that. Yeah. Puny, you said, now I understand why Chad was explaining himself on X. Yeah. Yeah. You said also it was definitely a double team. Yeah, listen, Jason was a horrible moderator. I mean, absolutely horrible. But I just wanted to, do this live simulcast on this MLK Day and get your thoughts about that. And I'll say this: Chad's position on slavery. I had a headache. I told my wife I had a headache this morning, and I took something for my headache. Now it came back. Thanks to Chad. Appreciate that. Appreciate that, Chad. Thank you, sir. I owe it all to you. So anyway, I'm gonna go let you guys go, and let you guys get back to your day. But if any more debates or quote unquote debates that Jason is hosting, Jason is a biased moderator. He's biased. I mean, he was biased when it came to Anton Daniels. In his interview with him, defending his how he handled Corey Holcomb. And you saw it here. But anyway. All right, I'm going to let y'all go. You guys have a great day. I don't have no outro music. Just let y'all go. Appreciate the love and support. And y'all know the drill. Whatever you do, do all to the glory and honor of God. God bless.